It echoes onward 1. As Imp and Scamp slumbered and grew, Black Nail was hard at work. As the leader of the goblin tribe he had many important duties that he couldn't ignore, like yelling at random goblins and glaring at everyone that tried to talk to him. Usually, when someone approached him they wanted him to do something annoying or answer a question he didn't actually know anything about. Making up answers that satisfied his minions was a pain, so Black Nail went out of his way to discourage such behavior. The goblins could figure out how to make tools and build stuff on their own now, or they could ask Gob. It wasn't his job to help others, he was leader. There were also more important things that Black Nail had to concentrate on, like eating, and preparing for the hobgoblin's awakening. Someone had to focus on the big picture, someone intelligent and resourceful. Hobgoblins were dangerous and Black Nail wasn't going to let them wander off or sleep unattended. Under his orders, the 2 sleeping goblins were moved into secure cages made from lashed-together stakes. The cages would remain sealed until Black Nail could appraise the new hobgoblins and make sure they could be trained to obey orders. He had no use for them if they were unruly. Hobgoblins made Black Nail uneasy. They were untrustworthy, and Black Nail was an expert on the subject because he was one. He knew exactly how twisted and dark their minds were. Gob wasn't so bad and he had proven his loyalty, but Black Nail's gut told him that Gob was a weirdo and that other hobgoblins would be much more difficult to deal with. As a young goblin, Gob must have fallen and hit his head against a rock or something. 2 days passed while Scamp and Imp slept and changed, and the goblin lair continued to develop. As more and more hides were tanned, the previously naked goblins began to wear fur and hide clothes which they decorated with feathers and trinkets. They also began carrying more stone tools such as spears and axes. Most significantly of all, Gob completed his longhouse. Dozens of goblins now slept inside the long dark building. It was far more comfortable than a cave and all the body heat warmed it at night. It didn't smell great, though. Farrer had become obsessed with making clay bowls. He had a group of overseers forcing goblins to constantly bring him materials and refine it for him, and that suited Black Nail just fine. The goblin himself spent all day building and experimenting with different types of firing pits and shapes of bowls. His eyebrows grew singed from constantly standing next to the flames, but his efforts weren't wasted. Dozens of crude clay bowls were now stacked up in the larder, where they wouldn't be stolen or broken by curious goblins. There were even a few large pots meant for cooking. Black Nail wasn't sure whose idea those had been, but it had been a good one. He would have to take credit for it. The sun was just reaching its noonday peak on the 3rd day, as Black Nail was sitting down by the cooking fire to make himself some lunch. Most of the camp ran fine without him now anyway. He was just about to start cooking the mix of meat and veggies he had cut up, when Elias ran up next to him. Scamp is awake, the man explained breathlessly. Black Nail eyed his uncooked meal carefully for a few seconds before responding. It was tempting to let Scamp wait, but he decided he didn't want to deal with this situation on a full stomach. That could get unpleasant. Fine, let's go, Black Nail muttered as he put his frying pan down on a rock. It was unlikely any goblin would be brave or suicidal enough to steal it. The pair quickly walked over to the cages, which were right beside each other. Inside the one on the left there was movement. A tall shape slowly withdrew from the bars, as if it was trying to pretend hadn't just been chewing on them. Black Nail wasn't fooled, though. He was very observant and there were teeth marks clearly visible on the bars. Go get Gob, Black Nail told Elias. Without another word, the human went off to do as he had been told. Black Nail focused on the cage's occupant. The new hobgoblin inside was thin and gangly. His ribs were exposed by his thin flesh that lacked any sort of fat. Although, Black Nail could still recognize him, Scamp's face had changed a lot. It had grown longer and less chubby looking. However, Scamp still had soft round eyes that made him seem almost friendly instead of vicious. It made Black Nail want to punch his dumb face. Also, Scamp had always had a bit of messy black hair on his head, but now it looked like both the length of his hair and the area covered by it had grown out quite a bit over the past few days. The result was a mess of hair with patches of different lengths. Black Nail was glad he was naturally bald. Having hair seemed like a pointless inconvenience. Pulling out his knife, Black Nail cut the cord holding one of the cage's vertical bars in place. It fell away and opened up a space wide enough for a hobgoblin to step through. Black Nail took a step back out of the way, so Scamp cautiously stepped out of the cage. The 2 hobgoblins faced each other. Black Nail kept his face neutral, but Scamp was clearly dealing with a confusing mix of emotions. He fidgeted and had difficulty meeting Black Nail's eyes, like he was uncomfortable in his own skin. Neither of them said anything for a few moments, until Scamp broke the silence. Hey there, Black Nail. How's it going? He asked as he shifted his weight awkwardly. That was when Black Nail punched him right in the face. Scamp squeaked as his nose was flattened against his face, and he fell over backward. The blow had taken him completely by surprise. That's not what you should call me, Black Nail hissed as he leaned over to stare menacingly into Scamp's eyes. There hadn't been nearly enough fear there before, but that could be fixed easily enough by gratuitous violence. Sorry, boss. Scamp whined as he cowered on the ground in front of Black Nail. Who is your boss? You are. Are you going to do everything I tell you? And obey my every order? Yes, boss. Good. Black Nail growled as he lunged forward, grabbed Scamp by the throat, and pinned him against the ground. If you don't then I will rip your neck open. Black Nail growled as he squeezed. Remember this, you puny wimp. If you try and run away I will hunt you like prey and gut you while you scream. Fleeing through the forest won't save you from me. Black Nail wasn't messing around and his tone of voice made that clear. He sounded more like an enraged beast than a thinking being. Hobgoblin minions were an important part of Black Nail's plan, but that didn't mean he had to like them. If there were going to be other hobgoblins around, then they were going to have two choices: submit completely or be torn apart. Black Nail wasn't going to take as much as a single insubordinate look from another hobgoblin. He was the leader and it was going to stay that way. Challengers would be put down. Up, stand up, Black Nail ordered Scamp after letting him go and stepping back. The new hobgoblin rushed to obey and hurriedly climbed to his feet. Even standing, Scamp kept cowering in fear. Before Black Nail could give him another command, someone else spoke up. "Can you let me out too, great leader?" a familiar yet odd voice asked. A twinge of irritation went through Black Nail. He turned towards the source of the voice and saw a figure stand up in the other cell. It was Imp. He was awake, and he had changed a lot. The goblin's form had been stretched out into that of a hobgoblin. His long nose was pointier than Scamp's, but it was his eyes that stood out the most. They were narrower with red irises that shone with intelligence. He looked very different from Scamp. "I promise to obey," Imp remarked as he waited by the bars. He seemed perfectly respectful and in control of himself. Black Nail considered his options. He didn't feel like letting Imp out, but it was actually convenient for him to deal with both the hobgoblins at the same time. Black Nail got his knife out and opened up the cage. When Imp stepped out, Black Nail punched him in the face. There was a loud crack. "Ow, why did you do that?" Imp asked as he held his bleeding nose. He had fallen onto his ass from the impact. "Because I could." "Now get up," Black Nail hissed in answer. He hadn't believed Imp was actually planning on being obedient for even a second. Even as a goblin he had been creepily good at hiding his thoughts, so Black Nail was just going to assume he was untrustworthy and keep hitting him. Imp climbed to his feet and walked up next to Scamp. There was now a rebellious spark in his eyes that hadn't been there before, and that cheered Black Nail up greatly. Now he could look forward to beating it out of him. Both Scamp and Imp glared at Black Nail as Gob and Elias arrived. Like Black Nail, Gob was taller and more heavily built than Scamp and Imp. However, both the newly transformed hobgoblins would quickly put on weight and grow a bit once they started eating. "Our numbers grow," Gob exclaimed happily. He eyed both the new hobgoblins with a mix of excitement and suspicion. "Don't kill either of them without permission," Black Nail replied absently. "That would be inconvenient." "Yes, boss," Gob said as he sheathed the dagger he had just drawn a second ago. "You can hit them a lot, though. Discipline must be beaten into them," Black Nail added. He remembered how he had felt after becoming a hobgoblin. His paranoia and bloodthirst had been difficult to suppress. He never would have managed it without his lost master. Even now, Black Nail could sense resentment and rebelliousness from Imp and Scamp. "Both of you must do as Gob says." "His words are mine," Black Nail told Scamp and Imp. He glared at them until they reluctantly nodded back. "I shall teach them proper respect, mighty leader," Gob responded eagerly. "They won't dare question you." "That's all I ask," Black Nail said as he nodded happily. Gob really understood him. Just then, Scamp's stomach grumbled loudly. Black Nail turned and gave the hobgoblin an appraising look. He should probably let the new hobgoblins eat something now. They looked really hungry, and they hadn't eaten in days. "You have my permission to go get some food. When you are done you will be given chores. If you try and run away I will hunt you down and carve out your hearts," Black Nail told the two hobgoblins. It was important they knew the consequences of misbehavior. "What if we both run in opposite directions?" Scamp asked. Black Nail scowled at him and considered the question. Imp took a step away from Scamp. "Why are you asking?" Black Nail inquired. He was surprised by the question. It was a stupid thing to ask, even for Scamp. "I'm just curious." "If you both run then I will send Gob after one of you," Black Nail answered. Scamp glanced at Gob out of the corner of his eyes, as if he was weighing his chances. Gob sighed, stepped forward, and punched Scamp in the gut. The new hobgoblin gasped and fell to his knees. Black Nail watched and nodded approvingly. This was a successful learning moment. "You are weak and I am strong. Do as our great master commands or suffer and die," Gob hissed as he glared down at Scamp. "All right, fine. I will do everything you say." Scamp replied after a few moments of painful-sounding wheezing. "Yes, me too. I live to obey," Imp quickly added as Gob turned his way. It seemed like they were under control for now, so Black Nail dismissed them. Imp and Scamp quickly retreated towards the larder. "That went well," Black Nail told Gob. The other mature hobgoblin nodded in agreement, not because he agreed, but so he didn't get punched in the face by his chieftain. Yep, everything looked in order. Now Black Nail just had to wait for Scamp and Imp's inevitable attempt to kill him. There was no way both of them wouldn't try it at least once. Scamp's attempt would probably be pathetic and easily thwarted, but it was a good thing Black Nail had confiscated Imp's bag. Magic explosive rocks would really have messed up Black Nail's plan to survive with all his limbs intact. Killing Warwick would be difficult with only one leg. Gob and Black Nail took a few minutes to discuss their plans as they waited for the new hobgoblins to finish eating. They could see the larder entrance from where they were standing and Black Nail kept an eye on it in case one of the hobgoblins tried to slip away. You couldn't be too careful around the untrustworthy freaks. Cedar had beaten discipline into Black Nail by teaching him swordsmanship. Only when it became very clear to Black Nail that his attempts to fight back were utterly futile and that his rage was weakening him had Black Nail began to learn to control himself. There was no reason to change a system that worked. Black Nail was planning on personally training the other hobgoblins the same way. In preparation, he had already gone back to shelter and acquired some wooden training blades. He had also taken the time to teach Gob the basics of sword fighting so that he had a head start on the other hobgoblins. Imp and Scamp walked back out of the larder cave with a pile of food. They didn't bother cooking any of it but instead immediately sat down and began eating. They shoved smoked meat and roots in their mouth as they sat on a pair of large grey rocks. When they were done, Blacknail walked over. It was time to get them to work. They had to get used to following his orders. Scamp was sent to help Gob build tools. Blacknail decided to oversee Imp himself. Imp was definitely the more dangerous of the two and Blacknail wanted to keep an eye on him. He led the hobgoblin over to where a mob of goblins was working on firing some clay. Farrer was there leading the effort with the special enthusiasm he always showed when things near him were on fire. The goblin gibbered and pranced around the flames with his arms above his head. The goblins stirred uneasily as Imp approached them. They threw careful glances between him and Blacknail. Some of the goblins seemed to expect a fight to break out at any second, and they weren't wrong in thinking that. However, Farrer immediately left the firing pits and approached the hobgoblins. "Show Imp how to make pots," Blacknail told the goblin. He was too lazy to do it himself. Farrer nodded at Blacknail and then exchanged a few squeaks and grunts with Imp. The goblin then led the hobgoblin over to the big flat rock where the clay was being strained. Imp followed him and studied everything with obvious interest. The pair quickly got to work. That was exactly what Blacknail had wanted them to do, but he was still very annoyed. What kind of hobgoblin meekly took orders from a mere goblin? Why wasn't Imp being more aggressive? This was no fun. He had been expecting to have to scream at Imp repeatedly to get anything done, but it was looking like he wasn't going to have to do anything. With a sigh, Blacknail walked over to a nearby rock and laid down on top of it. At least it was a nice sunny day and the light was warm on his skin. With Farrer's help, Imp began building a series of large pots. He seemed rather excited about it actually. From atop the rock he was resting on, Blacknail occasionally yelled things at them, but his heart wasn't in it. Eventually, it began to get dark and Blacknail got bored. It didn't seem like the hobgoblin was going to misbehave, so Blacknail had something much more important that he needed to do. He was going to throw a feast and finally cook up some stew. It would be a huge event in celebration of the two hobgoblins waking up, but mostly it would be about how amazing Blacknail was. They also finally had enough bowls to serve most of the goblins. Blacknail couldn't wait. He was going to make the best stew ever, and everyone would know how great he was at everything. He had been the one to teach the tribe to hunt, fire clay, and to cook. He was also a really nice person. The food for the feast had already been gathered by the goblins and was sitting in the larder. Blacknail sent out minions to gather the ingredients he needed and to drag the big iron pot over. It had gone unused until now. Once the pot was propped up above the fire, Blacknail threw the ingredients in and started the fire below it. Soon, the stew was bubbling away and steam was rising up into the air. The smell attracted curious goblins who wandered over to see what was going on. Blacknail smiled to himself. His creation was almost done. Now, he just had to start handing out the bowls and then he would finally get to show everyone how great his stew was. Everything he cooked was tasty, especially his stew, and this batch in particular was turning out great. It had a nice spicy taste, which was probably from the purple leaves he had thrown in. He had never seen leaves like that before, but they had certainly looked tasty. Suddenly, an eerie howl echoed out across the hills. It had come from out in the forest. Blacknail kept on stirring. It was probably nothing. Another louder howl rose up into the air. The goblins near Blacknail began to look nervous and started mumbling among themselves. Blacknail thought they were being jumpy cowards. It was probably nothing. A terrified shriek suddenly erupted from somewhere near the edge of the hills. It was quickly followed by dozens of shrill goblin screams and beastly growls. That was probably something. Blacknail looked up and scanned the hills. It sounded like a mob of panicked goblins was headed his way, and judging from the growling, something hungry was chasing them. Blacknail let out a deep breath. Of course, this was going to happen now, just as he was finishing up his cooking. It echoes onward too. Blacknail stepped away from the pot of stew he had been cooking and drew his sword. The late afternoon sky overhead was dark and cloudy. The wind was still and quiet, but that only created an expectant atmosphere that filled Blacknail with unease and amplified the other noises. It sounded like the goblin's base was under attack. Blacknail could hear howling and screams, and neither of those sounds usually meant anything good. Feeling concerned, Blacknail peered over the heads of the nearby mob of goblins, towards the rocky hills beyond them. It was good thing they were so short. Across the clearing, 3 goblins ran out from behind a hill as if something dreadful was chasing them, because something was. There was a vicious snarl and a grey blur burst into sight. It tackled one of the goblins to the ground. The green critter screamed in pain and struggled to escape its attacker. Long jaws descended and there was a crunching noise as it bit down. The goblin was being mauled by a large grey wolf. It looked like it hurt. One wolf wasn't much of a threat to Blacknail, but there were probably more around. Wolves were cowards like that. Blacknail felt fury start to bubble up from within him. How dare this animal enter his territory with such impunity? It was an insult. Blacknail snarled and lunged forward toward the wolf. He was going to cut the mangy beast to pieces and eat it. He didn't care how bad it tasted. The nearby goblins reacted at the same time as their leader, and immediately fled in the opposite direction. Blacknail hadn't been expecting anything else from them, but it still annoyed him. The cowardly creatures outnumbered the wolf 10 to 1. This was why you had to beat your goblins regularly. The wolf looked up from its prey and noticed the charging hobgoblin. It studied him for a quick second, and then without a word, it bounded away back behind the hill. Black Nail hissed in frustration as he slowed down. The overgrown doggy was running. Just as Black Nail came to a stop, he heard another growl from behind him. The hobgoblin glanced over his shoulder in time to see two new wolves dash in and pick off one of the fleeing goblins behind him. The nearby goblins shrieked in terror, and then one of them veered off to the side and ran straight into the fire pit. There was a crash as the goblin smacked into the pot and sent it crashing over. The goblin rolled through the fire pit, scattering sparks and embers, and then jumped up and continued running. No, my stew! Black Nail wailed in horror. As he watched, the food splashed out of the pot and spilled out across the ground. That was way more dirt than the recipe called for. His stew was ruined. He had put so much effort into making it. This wasn't fair. Black Nail stood there frozen, as the wolves that had pounced on the goblin turned and began to run off with their prize. Black Nail shook himself to clear his mind. Now wasn't the time to focus on spilled stew. There were important things to do. The wolves were killing his minions, and he wasn't going to let that happen. If he didn't get any food then no one was. Infuriatingly, the wolves were too far away for Black Nail to catch. They were fast bastards, and it was like they were working together to keep him off balance. Well, that wasn't going to work. Black Nail was a genius and thus much smarter than them. There was more than one way to hunt. Black Nail didn't need to catch the wolves. He hurriedly sheathed his sword and drew his sling instead. A moment later, he sent a rock through the air towards the closest wolf. It yelped in pain when the rock hit its leg, and then it crumpled and rolled across the ground before coming to a stop. Black Nail was already running towards it. Its companion saw him coming and took off with the goblin's corpse, but the wounded wolf wasn't so lucky. Before it could get up, Black Nail dove on top of the wolf and grabbed its furry neck. Got you! Black Nail yelled victoriously. His bloodthirst was in full swing now. The hobgoblin pulled out a dagger with his other hand, as the beast struggled to escape. It rolled onto its back and raked the hobgoblin's arm with its rear claws, but the pain just enraged Black Nail. His fury muted the feeling into irrelevance. The wolf snapped at Black Nail and hot spittle splashed across his face, but the hobgoblin kept his grip on the beast's neck and held it away. Black Nail snarled as he stabbed the wolf in the chest over and over again. A few seconds later, it went limp as blood began to pour out of its wounds. The hobgoblin relaxed but kept his grip on the beast as he stood up and looked around. He could still hear goblins screaming in panic, but there were only a few stragglers left nearby. The others had fled towards safety, but that wasn't the important thing. There were still more wolves that needed killing. There were too many piles of rocks blocking his view, so Black Nail decided to get a better vantage point. He needed to know what was going on. He ran over to the nearest hill and began to climb. After scrambling hallway up the rocky incline, Black Nail stopped and looked around. Below him, mobs of goblins were still rampaging around aimlessly. The occasional wolf could also be seen darting around. Off to one side, Gob was standing his ground outside the longhouse. A small formation of goblin overseers had formed up around him. Black Nail decided to head over there as well, but before he could, he heard something that caused him to jerk in surprise. A deep haunting howl washed over him. It was coming from his left and sounded far too close for comfort. Alarmed, Black Nail quickly glanced to his left, and he saw a wolf jump up onto the top of another hill. The beast was huge and stood out from the others. Its furry grey body dwarfed that of the other wolves Black Nail had seen, but the most startling thing about it was the series of dark blue spikes that ran down its back. It was a mutant. The vicious-looking creature stared directly at Black Nail, and the hobgoblin met its eyes. For a few seconds neither of them moved. They just glared at each other. Black Nail didn't like this new development. He hated mutants. They were trouble. There had been this one giant snake. The wolf that had run away from Black Nail appeared behind the alpha and took up position beside it. It was still holding the dead goblin in its jaws in a way that was very suggestive. The bloody thing looked smug, and it seemed to smile as it turned to stare at Black Nail. Well, two could play that game. The hobgoblin grinned as he lifted up the wolf he had killed. This seemed to anger the alpha wolf because it immediately growled. Black Nail growled back, but then realized he was at a disadvantage here. He was outnumbered and he didn't really want to fight a mutant. They could be very tough. Fighting would be a bad idea, but he wasn't going to back down either. This was his territory and no giant wolf monster was going to show up and scare him. That would make Black Nail look bad in front of all his minions. The hobgoblin and the beast continued to stare at each other hatefully from their respective hills. Black Nail couldn't help but notice how massive the mutant was, and he began to feel his rage fall away. Self-preservation was important after all. A lot of people depended on him. The beast looked like it weighed well over twice his weight, and like most mutants it probably had some sort of magical power. Attacking the wolf would undoubtedly be ill-advised, but showing weakness might also invite an attack. This was a problem. Maybe if he glared at it hard enough it would go away. He couldn't think of any better options, so that was what he did. Black Nail made his best scary face and took a confident pose. He continued to hold the dead wolf up, even if his arm was starting to hurt. The mangy carcass was heavy. The mutant wolf snarled and glared, but Black Nail didn't back down at all, not that he had much choice. It would be strategically unwise to move too much. Suddenly, there was a chorus of shouts from behind Black Nail and the stomping sound of a lot of small feet. Gob's voice was recognizable among the others. The wolf alpha looked away from Black Nail and towards the noise, so the hobgoblin snuck a quick glance over his shoulder. What he saw cheered him up considerably. It looked like Gob had managed to convince a small swarm of goblins to charge towards Black Nail's location. Gob and several overseers were at the back of the mob, where they could drive the others forward. Black Nail was going to have to reward Gob somehow. He was a great minion. The wolf threw a look back at Black Nail and snarled viciously, but it didn't attack. Instead, it raised its head and let out another echoing howl. Right away, the scattered wolves began to turn away from the camp and run towards the forest. Their grey forms zoomed through the rocks and out of sight. The alpha wolf then jumped down the hill and darted off towards the forest. Its companion followed it. "Ha, you're not tough. Fear me!" Black Nail shouted after it as he dropped the wolf carcass. His arm muscles really hurt now. "I'm here to help, Supreme One. Let us drive the enemy away," Gob said as his mob met up with their chief. The collected goblins looked nervous, but they were all armed, so they probably felt safer together and wouldn't flee. "I already did that," Black Nail replied proudly. "I just scared the enemy leader with my greatness, so they all ran. It was a huge and very dangerous mutant." "You are truly a mighty warrior," Gob remarked in awe. "I am," Black Nail agreed as he nodded smugly to himself. He had sure shown that furry freak who the boss was. He was. "The beast still lives, though. Should we chase it? It killed some of our tribe. Blood must pay for blood." A mental image of him trying to lead a mob of goblins through the forest after the wolf popped into Black Nail's head. It didn't seem like it would work very well, because they were so stupid and cowardly. The goblins would lose their confidence and desert in short order. That would leave Black Nail alone in the woods with the angry wolf pack, which didn't sound fun. "No, I have a better plan. We will have another chance to kill the foul beasts," Black Nail quickly replied. He actually had several different schemes that could work. His first plan involved hoping the wolves went away and never came back. This was the optimal outcome. His second plan involved waiting, building up his forces, and hoping the wolves didn't kill anyone important until he was ready for them. A dozen hobgoblins should even the odds enough. His third plan was to dig a big hole and hope they all fell in it. It wasn't a very good plan. "We need to build a wall," Black Nail mused aloud. He had a new appreciation for all the walls he had seen around human settlements. They had always seemed so useless to him, because they had been so easy for him to get through, but now he realized that keeping out amazing sneaks like him wasn't their purpose. They were meant to keep less awesome things like giant wolves or other predators out. Really, there was nothing that would keep Black Nail out of somewhere he wanted to go, anyway. He was too amazing. Yes, a wall was what he needed. Black Nail had thought that gathering a large tribe of goblins together would scare away most predators, or at least prevent them from coming right into camp where the important people were, but obviously that wasn't the case. More goblins just meant more food to some beasts. "What the bloody hells is going on?" Kida yelled as she ran up to Black Nail. The young redhead had her sword out and looked excited as she glanced in every direction. "That mutant wolf I warned you about was real, and it attacked," Black Nail told her. "He was always right and she was always wrong." "Really? Is it still here? Will it come back?" she asked him as she stared at the edge of the forest. "No, it's gone. I scared it away and it won't dare come back. Now it knows that only death waits for it here." "Blast, I wanted to see it, and to get a chance to take it down," Kida said as she sheathed her sword and sighed. She sounded really disappointed, and Black Nail rolled his eyes. If Kida had come face to the face with the wolf she would have been petrified from fear. She wasn't brave like him. "Where is Elias?" Black Nail asked her. "Cowering at the back of a cave with Scamp," she answered dismissively. "Ah, good." Black Nail had been slightly concerned. He hadn't seen them around, and losing them would be inconvenient. He still had a use for them. Black Nail and Gob spent the next hour calming down the camp. The wolves had picked off a few goblins but they didn't seem to have done any structural damage. Once everything was back under control, Black Nail put a few goblins on lookout. If the wolves returned and tore them apart their dying screams would give him a chance to prepare. As he was working, Black Nail's stomach suddenly rumbled. He had completely forgotten that he hadn't eaten. The attacking wolves had rudely interrupted his cooking. Black Nail quickly headed back the fire pit to see if there was anything left. He approached the toppled iron pot, knelt down, and peered within it. It was completely empty. "You filth! I will find you!" Black Nail roared as he stood back up. He shook from rage as he glared in every direction for any sign of a convenient target. It was obvious that some goblins had even taken advantage of the chaos and cleaned out the inside of the pot while he had been bravely facing down the alpha. What a bunch of thieving scum! Why did Black Nail even bother defending them? If they weren't so easy to turn into menial laborers then he would have already left them all to die. Grumbling to himself, Black Nail went to get some food from the larder. It wasn't very satisfying and only reminded him of the hot meal that had been stolen from him. Goblins were scum. After finishing his food, Black Nail headed off to bed. He didn't feel like staying up or doing anything useful. No one here appreciated the things he did for them. The next morning Black Nail felt better. He immediately tossed Kida out of her bed and went to work. Or at least he went out and started to get other people working. He was the leader. The first thing that needed done was to construct a wall. It was far too easy for dangerous forest creatures to get into the base and start munching down on goblins. The forests of the north contained an endless supply of slavering beasts, and Black Kale was using these goblins. Every barrier between his cave and an attacker was also appreciated. You could never be too careful. The wall will be made of pointy sticks. It needs to go around the entire base and be too high to jump, Black Nail explained to Gob. He had just finished showing the other hobgoblin how he wanted the wall built. As Gob watched he had chopped down several thin trees and stuck them in the ground. They were also tied together and supported by another piece of timber that was jammed in behind them on an angle. It was a crude copy of a design he had seen Herod use before. As you wish, I will make sure this wall encircles all the base, Great Master, Gob said. The hobgoblin nodded along seriously and looked eager to get going. Something about that reply bothered Black Nail. He took a second to think it through before replying. Leave a gap for an entrance. Sometimes Gob took him too literally. There had been an incident a few days ago after Black Nail had asked someone to knock some sense into Elias. Make that 2 entrances, I want one at the back as well. It's too far to walk, Black Nail added thoughtfully. Round up all the overseers and make some more, and get them to force every goblin they find that isn't already working to start cutting down trees. As Gob started to get down to work, Black Nail went to track down the other 2 new hobgoblins. He felt like getting some early morning exercise, it was past time to start training them, and he felt like beating someone up. It sure was convenient that he could do all 3 at the same time. Maybe Scamp or Imp would even try to kill him. That would really amuse Black Nail. He couldn't wait. It echoes onward 3. Imp was easy enough to find. The newly transformed hobgoblin was hanging out near the clay pits. He always seemed to be there, working on something that Black Nail didn't understand. It was almost like he enjoyed it, which was unsettling. Why would he enjoy working? It was weird behavior for a hobgoblin. Even Gob spent most his time bossing goblins around instead of doing chores himself. Black Nail had considered making Imp work somewhere else, but he was too productive to waste. With Imp there, the clay pits were producing over twice as much as before. On the other hand, Scamp was much more difficult to track down. Black Nail had to look around the base for a while before he found him. He wasn't in the longhouse or the larder. Eventually, he located Scamp napping over by some rocks on the far side of the camp. After a swift kick to the ribs, the sleeping hobgoblin yelped and jumped to his feet. When he calmed down and recognized Black Nail, Scamp smiled nervously and greeted his chieftain. Black Nail just snorted and told him to follow. He led Scamp over towards the center of the base, where Imp was waiting. Kida and Elias were also lounging nearby and sitting in the shade at the base of a hill. Both of them had their swords at their hips, but they only looked up as the new arrivals approached and didn't move. Well, this ought to be an amusing show. It's usually very boring around here. Elias remarked as he grinned nastily at the hobgoblins. Now I will teach you how to use a blade, Black Nail told the other 2 hobgoblins as he tossed them wooden practice blades. He picked up one for himself and took up position in front of his minions. Imp didn't look that impressed. He studied the sword for a second and then looked back towards where he had been working. Scamp smiled excitedly and waved his new weapon around a few times experimentally. I always wanted to get a shiny sword. When I learn this, will I get one? Scamp asked. He looked hopeful, which amused Black Nail. Yes, when your training is done, Black Nail told him. He had a small stash of extra blades he had taken from people who were incapable of using them anymore. Now, stand like this and hold the blade up, Black Nail ordered Scamp and Imp as he showed them the proper stance and technique. Both of the hobgoblins studied him and shifted their stances, but neither of them copied it correctly. They both looked off balance and open to attack. Black Nail showed them a few different techniques and watched them try them. Imp seemed to just be going through the motions without any real interest, and Scamp was goofing around instead of learning properly. That was all right. Black Nail had a plan for motivating them. He ordered Scamp forward and told him to take up a defensive stance. Scamp obeyed and sloppily raised his blade up. A moment later, it was bashed aside and Black Nail's wooden sword smashed into his shoulder. Ugh, that hurt. Scamp yelped as he was knocked over sideways. Too slow, Black Nail hissed coldly. It was also weak. Are you a real hob or an overgrown goblin? I'm a hobgoblin. Scamp whined as he got back up. He was wincing from the pain and rubbing his shoulder. Then act like it, you runt. Step back and let Imp come over here. Both the hobgoblins quickly obeyed. Imp didn't look very excited about taking his turn. He wasn't stupid, so he'd already figured out what was coming next. Take a defensive stance, Black Nail told him. Can you just show me how to do it? Imp asked hopefully. I don't think I know the right way, but I'm sure a great teacher like you could show me. There was a nervous smile on his face as he met his instructor's gaze. Black Nail grinned back, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Nope, he laughed as he swung his blade. The weapon hit Imp in the stomach. He crumpled and fell to his knees. Ow, Imp groaned. Pay attention next time, you arrogant runt. You aren't smarter than anyone else. You're just an arrogant prick of a hobgoblin, Black Nail told him. His voice and expression were both harsh and unyielding. That was how the rest of the training went. Black Nail would explain a technique to them, they would try to copy him, and then they would be tested. Failure always resulted in pain, and neither of the hobgoblins ever passed a single one of Black Nail's tests. His blade slipped through their defenses or pushed their own weapon aside every time. Going on easy on them would defy the entire point of the exercise. It also wouldn't be any fun. Black Nail was having a great time. Why are Kida and Elias here? Scamp asked as he stepped forward again. He was obviously trying to distract Black Nail and buy himself a few minutes of rest. To watch and prevent you from doing something stupid, Black Nail replied as he glanced at Imp. They are also here to remind you of all the people who could stab you to death, because you suck. The other hobgoblin glared back. He was seething with rage and red in the face. Clearly, the training was working. Black Nail was a great teacher. I can take over the training if you want, Scamp. I think I'd like a chance to knock a hobgoblin around, and I think Blacknail is going a little easy on you, Kida said from over where she was sitting. Scamp paused and looked uncertain. He clearly hadn't expected Kida to say such a thing. However, before he could make up his mind, Blacknail spoke up. Not today, but maybe another time. I got this, he said as he motioned Scamp forward again. They continued to train for half an hour until Blacknail eventually stopped and addressed his tired-out minions. Alright, that's enough for today. Really? Scamp asked hesitantly. He was favoring one leg and he had developed a few purple bruises. Imp was in a similar sorry state. Yes, unless either of you want a chance to hit me back. What do you mean? Imp asked. The hobgoblin sounded intrigued but also cautious. He suspected a trap. It had been that kind of day. We could spar, Blacknail told him. Imp's beady red eyes stared intently at Blacknail for several long seconds. His hands were gripping the wooden practice blade so tightly they almost seemed to be shaking. He looked really tempted to give in to his rage and take up the offer. Scamp quickly shook his head to signal he wasn't interested. He was a coward, so that wasn't surprising. No, I would never want to hurt you, wise leader, Imp eventually hissed in reply. He didn't sound like he really meant it. Too bad, because now your wise leader feels like sparring with you. We will keep going until I say so or you hit me. Maybe you will learn some of my wisdom, Blacknail replied smugly as he grinned from ear to ear. There was a hateful hiss from Imp as he raised his blade up in front of his face. It was an aggressive stance, but instead of charging, Imp cautiously inched forward. Blacknail didn't feel like waiting for him. He lunged, battered Imp's sword aside, and then smashed his sword into the other hobgoblin's ribs. Imp flinched but gritted his teeth and tried to strike back. However, he aimed too high and Blacknail easily ducked under his slash. Over the next few minutes, Blacknail demolished Imp. The newly transformed hobgoblin quickly descended into a blind rage and began swinging wildly. Hold still, he screeched as Blacknail stepped back away from one of his attacks. Imp continued to attack over and over again, but none of his attacks hit. Blacknail dodged and parried them all, while occasionally slipping in his own attacks. Imp's complete loss of self-control was deeply satisfying. Blacknail couldn't stop himself from grinning widely in delight. Imp had been far too self-controlled as a goblin, so Blacknail had always wanted to beat the smugness out of him. He wasn't so smart now, was he? Eventually, Imp screamed hatefully at the top of his lungs, dove forward, and was promptly smacked down. The flat of Blacknail's blade crashed into the top of his head and knocked him down into the dirt. He coughed and didn't get back up. Instead, Imp just lay there on the ground. Do you give up? Blacknail asked the prone hobgoblin. Instead of replying, Imp let out a defeated groan that Blacknail assumed meant yes. Remember this lesson, weakling. Strength comes from obedience, not from rage, Blacknail told Imp as he leaned down over him. Defy me and you will stay weak and pathetic, and weakness leads to pain. It was important that Blacknail's new hobgoblin minions not only learn to fight but also to fear him. Unquestioning obedience born from hopelessness was required. Blacknail couldn't have disobedient hobgoblins running around. That would be too dangerous. Tomorrow will be your turn to spar, Blacknail told Scamp as he turned and gave him a meaningful look. Scamp gulped in fear and Elias laughed. That sure was interesting, the young man remarked as he got up and walked over to Scamp. I always wondered how Cedar trained you, so that you wouldn't kill him in his sleep or anything. I was a better learner than these two, Blacknail told him. Memories of hanging from a tree and being beaten up by Cedar rose up in his mind, but he suppressed them. Come on, you look like shit. Let's get you something to eat, Elias told Scamp as the pair walked away. Kida followed Blacknail back over to where the wall was under construction. They left him alone on the ground. The training continued over the next 2 days. For a few hours every afternoon, Blacknail taught Scamp and Imp how to use a sword and how to control their emotions. They weren't very good at either yet, but Blacknail was having fun, so he wasn't in too much of a hurry. Over and over again, he showed them the basics of sword fighting and hit them when they failed to impress him. The objective was not only to motivate them to succeed but also to enrage them. During the sparring, when they lost control and tried to hit him, Blacknail simply countered using his vastly superior skills and then humiliated them. The point was to condition them to not give in to their anger. The hobgoblin's violent instincts had to be suppressed, and Blacknail wanted them to know he was in charge. He was the leader, and he didn't plan on stepping down or letting himself get killed. He also took an hour every day to teach Gob, who he didn't beat black and purple. However, Gob spent most of his time overseeing the construction of the wall around the base. The goblins needed to be watched at all times or they would slack off. Blacknail was fairly sure that most of them were only pretending to work anyway, but there wasn't much he could do about it. Still, the wall was starting to take form. Its rickety wooden length looked like garbage, but it would do its job and keep out most the nasty wildlife. Gangs of goblins led by overseers were constantly dragging timber out of the forest. Even goblins with stone axes could cut down slender young trees fairly easily, and there were a lot of goblins around. It was a good thing the larder was full of food because everyone was too busy to hunt or forage. On the third morning, Blacknail decided to head back to the human village. He had grown bored of hanging around the goblin lair and wanted to talk to some other people. He was also out of cheese. Going without cheese for a few days was unthinkable. We need some supplies, so I'm going to lead a mission back to shelter. It will be dangerous but I can handle it, no problem, Blacknail told Gob as he smiled confidently. Thank you, most powerful of chiefs. Surely, only you could do this, Gob replied as he gave a little bow. Pretty much, Black Nail agreed as he nodded along happily in agreement. Gob sure said it like it was. I want to come, Farrer said as he scampered up to Black Nail's side. The hobgoblin chief looked down at him and frowned thoughtfully. Why? All the things you want to burn are here. You're not allowed to burn things there. I need to learn something from humans, Farrer explained. Humans know a lot about fire and clay that imp and I want to know too. The idea didn't immediately appeal to Black Nail. The creepy little goblin wanted to go and talk to some humans? That didn't sound like a good idea. They'd probably kill him and then hunt down every other goblin they could find. Black Nail could barely resist the urge to do that himself. It will allow us to cook new tastier foods, Farrer added as he noticed his chieftain's reluctance. Alright, let's go. Black Nail replied excitedly. He had grown tired of the simple fare available at the goblin camp. Good food made everything better. The goblin's coming with us now. Kida asked from where she was standing nearby. Half a dozen goblins were beside her. They had been chosen to join the mission. Yes, he has a very important task, Black Nail told her. I wish I could go back to shelter. It's a pile of dung full of peasants, but I'm really getting sick of staying out here in the forest. The gods know I would do anything to get back to civilization, Elias whined. The young man was also nearby, although he wasn't joining the mission. He simply had nowhere better to be. Lately, he had been working under Gob a lot and helping out with the wall. Black Nail wasn't sure if it was by choice or if Gob had conscripted him, and he didn't really care. I told them you stole their coins and deserted so you can't go back, but you can be the second in command while we're gone. That's a promotion for working so hard lately. Black Nail told him. Oh, good, Elias replied as he scowled. He didn't seem all happy about the wonderful promotion he'd just been given. Black Nail decided not to take that as an insult. Elias had always been a miserable person. That was why annoying him was so fun. Just watch for Scamp and Imp while I'm gone, Black Nail warned him. They might go insane and start killing people at any time. If that happens you need to help Gob fight them off. What? Is that a real possibility? You must be joking, Elias asked in alarm. He looked concerned and more than a little afraid. It was unbecoming of a second in command. That's always a possibility with hobgoblins, even me, Black Nail laughed as he walked away. Elias was a funny guy. Without wasting any more time, the group set off. Black Nail took the lead as they trudged through the forest. The mixed group passed between rows of towering trees and up and down rocky hills as they approached their destination. The familiar journey took them about an hour. Once they were near the village, they stopped among a thick clump of bushes at the edge of the fields. Can you sneak past the walls and rejoin us? Black Nail asked Farrer. Sure, I sneak in there all the time, Farrer replied with a confident smile and an excited nod. This reply caught Black Nail off guard. What was this now? When did Farrer have the time visit the humans? Why would he want to? After a few seconds of furious thinking Black Nail decided to let it go. This didn't sound like it was his problem. As the leader, he needed to focus on the important things, like getting his cheese. Kida and Black Nail left the goblins behind. They crossed the fields and went in through Shelter's gate. The one old farmer that was serving as the guard let them in without any concern. They were familiar visitors now. The hooded hobgoblin even gave the man a friendly nod. Being polite was important. The pair wandered through the streets until they got to where Geralt had taken up residence. It was a small home that looked like it had seen better days, but it was clean and serviceable. Compared to Black Nail's cave it was a mansion. Kida walked up to the door and called out, but no one answered. He doesn't seem to be home, she told Black Nail. I'm right here. I heard you'd come to visit my humble abode and decided to cut you off, Geralt answered from behind them. The both turned to see him walking towards them from down the street. Oh, where were you? I hope we aren't interrupting anything, Kida asked. I was simply out and about. It was nothing important. Now, to what do I owe the pleasure of your visit? He asked in return. Black Nail was fairly sure it was question. Geralt had sometimes had a problem speaking clearly. I bet you were with a woman, Kida laughed. There was an amused grin on her face. In this village? I prefer having relationships with less strings attached, Geralt replied with a grimace of distaste. Oh, like with Vorsha, Black Nail observed. Geralt and Vorsha had done everything together until Warwick's attack. They had been forced to leave her behind when they fled the battle and she had died horribly. It was too bad. She had been strong and useful. Yes, Geralt replied with obvious awkwardness. He suddenly looked a little sad. That was utterly thoughtless. You don't say things like that, Kida quietly hissed at the hobgoblin. Black Nail sighed and rolled his eyes. He had no idea what she was talking about. It must be a stupid human thing. Every time he thought he had them figured out he was proven wrong. Well, let's not stand out here on the public street and under the sun. Come in and have some tea. It's dreadful herbal stuff but it's still better than the locals will, Geralt had said as he walked over to the entrance of his home. Black Nail didn't think Geralt had looked too hurt by his words. Kida was probably being overdramatic. She did that a lot. It echoes onward 4. The main street that ran through the village of Shelter was little more than a wide dirt path. The homes that ran along both sides of it were squat buildings with thatch roofs. The sound of people talking and the creaking of wood could be heard off in the distance. Nothing looked broken or ruined, but everything looked like it had been patched several times. Geralt had walked through the front door of the house where he was staying. It led into a small kitchen. Kida and Black Nail followed him. As Geralt had threw some water into a pot and lit a small fire in his stove, Both his guests sat down at the table in the center of the room. So you didn't answer me before. Why are you here? Geralt asked after he joined them a few moments later. You owe me more cheese. I don't have any left, Black Nail immediately told him. His voice was rather intense, because he was rather upset about it. Geralt rolled his eyes, but before he could reply, there was a knock on the front door and someone spoke up from outside. It's me, Tannen. I heard you had some guests visiting so I decided to stop on by. Come on in. I just put some water on for tea, Geralt replied after letting out a deep sigh. The young man then turned and gave Black Nail a meaningful look. Be good, he told the hobgoblin. I'm always good. You humans are the ones who always mess things up. Do better, Black Nail replied dismissively. As the leader, he was the only one that got to judge people's performances. The front door then swung open and Tannen stepped inside. The bearded old man gave them all a polite nod of greeting. There was a friendly smile on his face and his eyes held a warm twinkle. Black Nail decided that this meant the old man wanted something. The hobgoblin was getting used to humans' strange ways. I see you're still alive, young lass, Tannen told Kita. A few of the others had a bet going. Most of them thought you'd die or come crawling back here within a day or two. Living out in the forest is rough going for anyone, let alone a young woman. I can take care of myself, Kita replied scornfully. I don't need anyone telling me what to do, where to live, or how to survive. Tell those old hags you stuck me with before to mind their own damn business. They can shove their etiquette where the sun don't shine. Her angry words just caused Tannen to chuckle loudly and grin wider. He looked quite amused. I take it that means you plan on staying out in the forest for a while longer, he asked her playfully. Yes, I do, she replied in a chilly tone. Tannen nodded and then turned towards the cloaked hobgoblin. And I see Black Nail as being as mysterious as always. Do you ever not wear a hood? Yes, Black Nail replied as he waited for his tea. He hoped it wasn't the bitter kind. For now, Tannen had nothing the hobgoblin wanted, so talking to him wasn't important. Geralt got up and pulled out a chair for Tannen, and then they both sat down. The two made small talk for a few moments, and Black Nail fought the urge to close his eyes and take a nap. When was he going to get his tea? He tried glaring at Geralt to get his point across, but the man ignored him. He wasn't a very good minion. Black Nail was going to have to do something about that later. Why don't you ask for Black Nail's help? Kita suddenly asked. The use of his name caused Black Nail to focus back on what everyone was saying. He hadn't been paying attention at all, so he had no idea what they were talking about. Does he know a lot about goblins? Tannen asked. Black Nail felt a small tingle of panic, but the man sounded friendly and curious. I dare say, he is one of the utmost experts on the subject, Geralt had replied with obvious amusement. I suppose he must have run into a lot of them out in the wild green, Tannen mused aloud. Black Nail had been about to claim complete ignorance about goblins, but since Geralt had spoken up, he decided to go along with it. This must an important conversation. Food was probably involved. You're having a problem with goblins? Black Nail asked as he straightened up in his chair. Yay, you could bloody well say that. Tannen huffed in frustration. We've suddenly been overrun by an infestation of the little pests. They're getting into everything. The thieving is bad but it's the destruction they leave in their wake that is the real damned problem. They're spoiling more food than they actually steal. Every day we lose vital supplies. Tannen sounded and looked like he wanted to hit something. He was holding one hand up and was clenching it tightly into a fist. This topic was obviously making him angry. Black Nail could use that. Tannen could probably be convinced to offer a tasty reward to anyone who solved his problem. As the old man continued to ramble on about spoiled grain, Black Nail heard a scratching noise from the far window. He looked out of the corner of his eye and noticed a green flash of movement. It was a goblin, a familiar one. Farrer had caught up to them and was peeking in through the window. This batch even seems smarter than usual, Tannen continued. They sniff out poison, and they even avoid all our traps. The weighted barrel trap used to catch them by the dozen, but when young Rayus checked it last night it was empty. Not only that, but somehow the goblins actually managed to disarm it and make off with the bait. If I didn't know better, I would swear they were listening in on us and learning to counter our plans. That's silly, goblins aren't that smart, Black Nail quickly agreed in a flat voice as he turned away from the goblin in the window and focused on Tannen's face. He needed to focus on manipulating the foolish human. Probably not, but something's going on here. Do you have any special tricks up your sleeves for dealing with the bloody things? There is nothing up my sleeves but my human arms, but I do know some tricks, Black Nail replied carefully. He didn't want to give himself away. There was a moment of awkward silence, so Black Nail spoke up again. I usually set bait out for them and then shoot them. Have you tried that? Black Nail had just made that up, but it was the best he could come up with on short notice, and it even sounded like it could work. When Black Nail wanted to chase goblins away he simply gave them chores. He usually never saw them again after that. However, this idea didn't appear to appease Tannen. The old man frowned and shook his head. He opened his mouth as if to speak but Kita cut him off. Black Nail, you're forgetting one obvious solution, she interjected. I am not, Black Nail hissed at her. She was dumb. You keep the wild goblins away by training other goblins to guard your stuff. Mr. Tannen could do the same thing. There is no reason he can't. Kita shot back. Black Nail grunted sourly. He hadn't forgotten that. It was just a really stupid thing to bring up. Was she trying to expose his true identity and ruin his plans? Probably not, she was just stupid. Guard goblins? Tannen asked doubtfully. He didn't seem sure if Kida was joking or not, but he clearly found the idea hilarious. There was an amused grin on his bearded face. That's what he does, and it works, Kida replied defiantly. She then shrugged like she didn't much care what he thought, even though it was obvious she did. As he turned towards Kida, Black Nail sighed and gave her an annoyed glare. Seriously? Why was she bringing this up? This idea was so dumb only a human could have thought of it. Tannen would never consider such a dumb plan. My old master used to do it, Black Nail explained after turning towards Tannen. Goblins are territorial, so if you take one and then it will drive the others away, but even trained goblins can be very annoying and get into trouble. Hey, that actually doesn't sound completely unreasonable, Tannen mused as he looked off to the side contemplatively. At this point I'd try almost anything, and feeding one goblin would cost us less than feeding 100 of the gods' damned despoilers. Under his hood, both of Black Nail's eyes widened from surprise. Kida's plan was so stupid it might actually work. He couldn't waste this opportunity to take advantage of how weird humans were. Letting the humans get used to goblins would suit Black Nail's purposes. It would also allow him to spy on the humans without concern, although apparently it wasn't that hard. Even feral goblins could do it. Farrer was still looking in through the window, and Black Nail had no doubt that he knew exactly what was going on. I happen to have some goblins you could borrow, Black Nail suggested. He had to press his advantage. They know some simple commands and will keep out of trouble. Geralt and the others can help you train them, so within a few days you should see a lot less goblin thefts. How exactly do you train goblins? Tannen asked. It sounded like he was seriously considering the idea. Mostly you just hit them a lot and offer them food. They only get into trouble if they get hungry, Black Nail told him. The water finally finished boiling and the shrill whistle of the kettle on the stove filled the air. As Geralt got up and served the tea, everyone continued to discuss the goblin problem. Eventually, Tannen agreed to accept a pair of goblins from Black Nail. With that decided, Black Nail and Kida excused themselves. Geralt had promised to give Black Nail some cheese when they stopped by on their way out of the village, and they had finished their tea, so there was little point in sticking around. They still had to go track down Joan and ask her a few questions for Scamp and Imp. I suppose you youngsters don't want to hang around here with an old man like me, Tannen laughed as they were leaving. Although, I suppose I have no idea how old you are, Black Nail. I'm 10, the hobgoblin answered him. That was a good age for a human, right? You're 10. Tannen repeated in disbelief. Oh, he seemed suspicious. Was that too low? 10.5. Black Nail suggested. Haha, Black Nail is such a joker, Geralt laughed. His laughter was awkwardly loud and there was a stiff smile on his face. Get out of here and let me talk to Tannen, he added as he motioned for Black Nail to leave. The hobgoblin immediately did as he was told and fled. Once outside, Black Nail and Kida headed towards where they had met Joan during their last visit, and the sound of little footsteps followed them. They passed by a few villagers as they walked and Black Nail gave them polite nods. When they got to their destination, Joan wasn't there, so Kida went to find her while Black Nail waited. Hello again, Mr. Black Nail. How can I help you? Joan asked when she arrived alongside a proud-looking Kida. The young blonde woman was wearing a long homespun dress and there was a polite but curious expression on her face. Black Nail didn't immediately respond. He just stared at her blankly. What had he wanted to ask her again? Farrer had been the one who had wanted to talk to her. He couldn't remember what the goblin had told him. He mumbled aloud to buy time. Thankfully, he didn't have long to wait. Farrer appeared from behind the corner of a nearby building. The little goblin looked extremely excited. He practically bounced as he ran over to join the conversation. Ask her about the color of clay matters, sometimes it goes black, the goblin suggested as he grabbed Black Nail's pants and looked up at the hobgoblin with wide eyes that shone with excitement. Does the color of the clay matter? Sometimes it's black. Black Nail repeated uncertainly at Joan. There was no immediate reply. The blonde girl studied Black Nail and the goblin for several long seconds. She was squinting at them, and she seemed unsure of something. Is the goblin asking the question? I think that's what I just heard, she asked in disbelief. This called for some skillful evasion of the truth. We're both asking, Black Nail answered. He likes to talk, even if it's nonsense, but you know that. He was here before. Are you sure this is the same goblin? It looks a little different. Yep, he is the same, and his name is Scamp, Black Nail replied cheerily as he nudged Farrer with his foot. The little pest had better play along. I'm Scamp and I've visited you before. That happened, Farrer quickly agreed as he nodded along enthusiastically. He was a smart little pest. How many talking goblins do you think there are? This is the same one as before, Kida added as she laughed. Her words seemed to convince Joan, although Black Nail wasn't sure why anyone would take her word over his. It was kind of insulting to be judged lower than Kida in any way. Farrer left Black Nail's side and wandered over to Joan. The young woman continued to stare at the goblin suspiciously, but she didn't back away. Farrer began to ask her question after question and she answered them one by one. Black Nail and Kida hung back and tried to look interested. It was hard. Making clay pottery was apparently much more complicated than Black Nail had thought. After talking for a few minutes, Joan led Farrer inside of a shed and showed him around. Farrer kept up his barrage of questions as they walked past several shelves. They stopped in front of an oven for a few moments and Joan opened its door to show Farrer. Black Nail peered inside as well, but it was empty and boring. Could they leave now? Alright, time to go. We have important things to do, Black Nail announced after a few minutes. He'd had enough. Looking at the oven had made him hungry. I'll come visit you again, the goblin told Joan as he smiled happily. I look forward to it, Joan replied. She still didn't seem to know what to make of the goblin and his questions, so she just smiled back politely. With their farewells complete, Joan left to walk home and Farrer disappeared. The goblin couldn't leave by the front door with them and had to sneak out. That left Kidda and Black Nail alone again. Let's get out of here before we run into one of the old ladies that live here. I swear the hags have nothing better to do than bug me, Kidda complained as she turned to watch the street. She looked in both directions as if she was afraid someone was trying to sneak up on her. On the way out of the village, they stopped by Geralt's again. Black Nail still needed to pick up his cheese. By this time, Tannen was gone and Geralt had met them at the door. Here you go. Someday soon I think I'm going to have to check out this base of yours, Geralt had remarked as he handed the package of cheese over to Black Nail. It smelled like a good batch. He could tell because it burned his nose when he tried to sniff it. You can't do that, Black Nail told him as he tucked the precious bit of dairy away in his cloak. Geralt didn't know about Elias or the horde of goblins there. Why not? Geralt asked. The quick reply had made him curious. It's a secret. Black Nail muttered uncertainly. The cheese fumes were still clouding his brain. He was still seeing flashes of color. One of Geralt's eyebrows rose. You have a secret base. A grimace appeared on Black Nail's face. It sounded dumb when Geralt had said it like that. There's a huge wolf pack in the area. They've been acting aggressively so it wouldn't be safe, Kidda added. Yay, that, Black Nail agreed. How was Kidda being so helpful? She had covered for him several times. It was weird. The hobgoblin scratched his nose. Maybe he was just having an off day? Oh, well, take care of yourselves, Geralt had told them. At the first sign of danger he had completely changed his mind about joining them. We're not afraid of any wolves, Kidda replied confidently. Black Nail didn't agree with her. He was tactically cautious about anything larger than him that wanted to eat him. After saying their goodbyes, Black Nail and Kidda headed out the village gates. They crossed the fields and met up with Farrer and the other goblins, who were waiting for them. Well, one goblin was missing, but Black Nail was sure it would show up later, or not. The important thing was that they had accomplished their mission. Did you learn what you wanted to? Black Nail asked Farrer. Yep, I know many new things about fire and clay. I can burn more now, Farrer replied eagerly. Did you learn how to cook or make better food? Black Nail asked suspiciously. That was the reason he had agreed to let Farrer come along. Yes. I learned about ovens, the goblin replied carefully. Good. Good, Black Nail muttered as he turned away. He had gotten his hands on cheese, new ways of cooking, and convinced the stupid humans to let goblins inside their village. Things were looking up. It echoes onward 5. Although Black Nail stopped every time he heard a twig break and studied every bush for signs of slavering monsters, he and the others made it back to the goblin lair without an incident. None of them were picked off by giant wolves, not even Kidda. Black Nail didn't understand how she had survived so long. The base was much the same as they had left it, which was unsurprising since less than a day had passed. After doing a quick patrol to make sure nothing suspicious was going on, Black Nail retired for the night. He was feeling lazy after so much walking. When he woke up the next morning and went to grab some breakfast, there were signs of new construction going on. Over by the clay works the hobgoblin imp was busy constructing a building of his own. It looked like a smaller version of the longhouse Gob had built, except round. Out in front of it, Farrer was busy digging a small pit, while goblins piled clay up beside him into a huge heap. As was normal for a project involving goblins, it was chaotic mess as goblins ran about in every direction. Half of them were so dirty they looked like mobile piles of mud. Only around imp was there any sense of order. The hobgoblin's presence cowed the nearby goblins. What are you doing? Why do you need so much clay? Black Nail asked Farrer as he wandered over to take a look. Was the goblin going to fill the hole with clay and bathe in it? Black Nail knew Farrer really liked clay, but that seemed silly and impractical. Building a furnace, Farrer answered as he continued to dig energetically. Out of clay. Yes, fire hardens it. Fire is great. You use clay and fire to make more clay and more fire. You can never have enough. I need more fire. Farrer explained as he gestured energetically at the empty hole in the ground and the pile of clay beside it. This seemed dumb to Black Nail, but what did he know? He was only the smartest hobgoblin ever to live. And you can use it to make food. Black Nail inquired in a firm tone. It was important to keep everyone's priorities straight. He was the leader. Yep, that too, the goblin replied absent-mindedly without looking up. Black Nail rolled his eyes and looked over at him for a few moments. The hobgoblin was still busy building the hut and ordering goblins around. Feeling assured that none of his nearby minions were slacking off, going crazier, or planning to kill him, Black Nail yawned and went to find some that were. He wanted some excitement. Eventually, he gave up and decided to head back to shelter. He had promised to deliver some goblins to them, and that sounded like it would be pretty amusing. After rounding up Kidda and a pack of goblins, he headed out back into the forest. Kidda was basically part of his disguise. Most of the people in the village seemed to like her, for some reason. However, they also planned to solve their goblin problem by importing more goblins, so they obviously weren't that smart. After the walk through the woods, Black Nail and Kida met up with Tannen inside the gates. As promised, they brought a pair of leashed goblins with them. Black Nail had chosen them because they both looked big and lazy. Thus they were large enough to fight off other goblins and not energetic enough to get into trouble. They had both volunteered after being grabbed and leashed, when they had learned that they would be getting free food without having to do anything to earn it. So these are the critters, eh? Tannen mused as he studied the goblins. He looked and sounded skeptical. Yes, I trained them myself, Black Nail replied. He had smacked them aside the head and told them to behave. That counted as training. Do they obey commands? A few simple ones, like sit and come. And having them around will keep other goblins out. Yes, goblins are very territorial. These new guards were probably some of the same goblins that had been causing the problems in the first place, but Black Nail wasn't going to mention that. In his experience, there were a lot of things humans were better off not knowing. It would only bother them. After explaining a few things and promising to deliver more goblins if the current pair worked out, Black Nail and Kida headed back. As they emerged from the trees around the goblin lair, they were presented with a great view of the clearing. Work was being done on building a second longhouse. Imp was building his own small hut, and there were almost a dozen fire pits scattered around the camp. However, the biggest change was the wall. The barrier of wooden stakes now stretched around almost half the exterior. The clearing had changed drastically since Black Nail had shown up. It used to look like an empty cluster of rocky hills. Now it was beginning to look like a proper base. Feeling proud of himself, Black Nail decided to stroll around. It wasn't like he was busy, anyway. Imp's hut was the most novel change, so he decided to check it out again. It also wouldn't be a bad idea to make sure Imp wasn't plotting anything dangerous. Black Nail was still expecting an attempt on his life. As he walked over, Black Nail spotted a heap of stuff piled outside the door of Imp's home. None of it looked like it had been made by goblins' hands. There was a pair of iron pots, some glass jars containing random powders or creams, a small pile of silverware, and a live chicken in cage. The terrified bird stared at the hobgoblin with mad eyes. What did Imp want with a live chicken? Was it just a snack or something else entirely? Black Nail had no idea, but he doubted it was part of an assassination attempt, unless Imp planned on poisoning it. The hobgoblin chieftain looked around for a few seconds, before creeping up to the door and peering inside. He didn't want to interrupt Imp's work, or walk into a trap. At first glance, there didn't appear to be anything suspicious going on inside. Imp was busy hanging things from the ceiling and storing things on crudely made shelves. However, after looking closer, Black Nail recognized some of the items. He saw a metal scale and a glass jar from Mahedium's lab. Imp had been carrying that stuff in his bag, but Black Nail had taken that bag away from him and hidden it after Imp had become a hobgoblin. Hey, where did you find that? I hid that bag. Black Nail asked as he stepped inside and frowned. Imp jumped slightly in surprise and then spun around. He then studied Black Nail for a quick second before answering. My bag? I found it in a hollow tree. I just followed my nose. It has a strong smell. There was a friendly expression on Imp's face as Black Nail glowered at him. Damned hobgoblins, Black Nail didn't like it when they used his own tricks against him. He wished he could outlaw it. It wasn't fair. Did you want it back? Imp asked respectfully. No, you can keep it. I'm a generous leader, so you can consider it a gift, Black Nail replied. Imp would have already taken out and hidden all the important things anyway. Since there was nothing else to do here, Black Nail decided to leave. He was a little disappointed. Neither Scamp nor Imp had tried to overthrow him, and didn't seem to even want to. What a bunch of layabouts. What kind of hobgoblins were they? On his way out, Black Nail spotted Farrer's latest project. The pit he had dug had been filled in by a mound of clay that rose several feet into the air. There was a big hole in one side and another at the top. Ash was spilling out of the bottom hole. It looked like Farrer had been burning things in the mound to harden the clay. Black Nail quickly lost interest in the mound and wandered off. It was just clay. Since Black Nail had no idea where Scamp was, he went to talk to Gob instead. There was no need to even look for him, since Black Nail could hear him yelling orders every once in a while. Gob's voice led Black Nail over to the newest section of the wall. The other hobgoblin was busy supervising the construction, as he had been ordered. Gob was very obedient. Black Nail needed more hobgoblins just like him. Good job keeping the goblins in line. You're doing great work, Black Nail congratulated the other hobgoblin. Thank you, Supreme Leader. I live to obey, Gob replied as he turned and bowed ever so slightly. The gesture caused the hobgoblin to lower his eyes submissively. He had just been watching the goblins working on the wall. Good to know, Black Nail replied happily. I'm looking for Scamp. Have you seen him around? He's over by that hill. He's sleeping, because I punched him out and tied him up. Oh, did you get tired of his stupidity? One of Black Nail's eyebrows rose in surprise. He could understand if that was the case. No, he tried to bash my head in with log. He was helping me build the wall and I turned my back on him, but I kept my ears open, Gob explained as he wiggled his long green ears. I let him live as you commanded. Good job, Black Nail replied with even more cheer. Maybe there was hope for Scamp yet. Both of the hobgoblins had earned a reward. He would take them hunting for big game. That was a fun activity that they could all do together. There was nothing like killing things to help hobgoblins bond. It was also one of the few jobs left that only Black Nail could do, so if he trained some replacements then he could slack off more. After getting directions, Black Nail went to fetch Scamp. He found the other hobgoblin at the base of a nearby hill. Just as Gob had said, he was tied up by ropes. One of them even ran around his head and through his mouth so that he couldn't talk. Scamp was lying on his back and staring at the sky, but he looked over and started fidgeting when he heard Black Nail approach. You tried to kill Gob, he's my second in command, Black Nail accused Scamp as he leaned over him. You're not good enough to replace him. Try it again and I'll boil you alive. There was a muffled whimpering sound as Scamp nodded desperately in agreement, so Black Nail sighed and began untying him. A few minutes later, he led the two other hobgoblins over to his cave and had them wait outside while he grabbed some things. When he returned he was carrying 3 bow staves. These are for you, Black Nail told them as he held 2 of the weapons out. We're going to go hunting. He then taught them how to string and maintain the bows. One of the bows was for Black Nail himself. It was the one his master had given to him in dagger point and it was made from a weird type of wood that was very hard and flexible. The other 2 bows had been taken from enemies, or enemies that had used to be friends until they weren't. Once they had fired off a few practice arrows at a log, the hobgoblins headed off into the forest. They were mostly there to learn from Black Nail's amazing skills, so they could practice accuracy later. If you shoot anyone in the back it won't stop me from tearing your limbs off, Black Nail warned Scamp. I would never do that, boss. I'm loyal and obedient, Scamp replied nervously. He had been eyeing Gob and playing with his bow when the other hobgoblin's back was turned. With a disdainful huff, Black Nail led them past the creek. They jumped across its muddy banks and went deeper into the green. Most animals worth hunting avoided the area around the goblin's camp. The trio trudged through the greenery before stumbling upon a fresh set of tracks. Black Nail took the time to point them out and give the other hobgoblins some tips on tracking. He then told them to be quiet and started following the trail. A few minutes later, Black Nail spotted a flicker of movement. Most of the trees here were huge things with smooth grey bark and trunks wide enough for several people to hide behind. They were fairly widely spaced apart, but row upon row of the trees stretched out in front of the group, and clusters of thick roots grew around the trees' bases. Around 100 feet ahead, a herd of deer were walking between the trees. There were about a dozen of the graceful beasts. Their brown spotted coats camouflaged in with the dark ground and bushes. They would have been hard to make out if they had been holding still and hadn't been walking. At the head of the herd was a large stag with magnificent antlers that were over a foot long. The stag looked warily around in every direction as he led his herd through the woods. Black Nail raised a hand and motioned for the others to be silent, and then started to creep through the trees. He wanted to slip around the herd and cut them off so he could get a better shot. It was a maneuver that humans would have had difficulty doing, but hobgoblins were naturally stealthy and this was their element. They simply had to follow their primal instincts. Hunting and creeping up on unexpected prey was what they did best. Scamp and Gob fell in behind Black Nail as he hunched down and scampered quietly around the deer. Occasionally, one of the beasts would glance over in their direction, but none of them noticed the approaching predators. The hobgoblins moved with an eerie precision and quiet that surprised even Black Nail. Sometimes he forgot that Scamp and Gob had been born in the wild. Even if they hadn't been taught by the greatest ranger ever to live like he had, they had survived on their own in these very forests for years. There was a thick tree positioned ahead of the herd and a bit to the side. Black Nail snuck up to the tree's trunk and hid himself behind it. The other 2 hobgoblins joined him a second later. The grey behemoth easily concealed all of them, and Black Nail quickly peeked around it. The deer were still headed towards them. If they didn't change course they would pass with an easy bowshot of the hobgoblin's hiding place. As they waited, Black Nail prepped his bow and drew an arrow. Scamp and Gob copied him. Once ready, Black Nail relaxed and waited for the right time to strike. The stag wandered within 100 feet and started to walk past the tree. The herd was moving parallel to Black Nail's group now. Every step now carried the lead deer further away. From behind the tree, Black Nail chose a target and drew his bow back. He would leave the stag alone and aim for one of the closer does. The hobgoblin could already taste the sweet deer flesh. He grinned wickedly as he let his arrow fly. The projectile zoomed through the air. It closed in on the doe's flank, and then passed under it. There was a thud as the quivering arrow sunk into the ground. Black Nail had missed. Turtle shit, he cursed to himself. There must have been wind or something. The noise and flash of movement from the arrow alerted the deer. The herd all perked up and then began to run off into the trees, away from the hobgoblins. That was when another arrow whirred past Black Nail and hit the flank of one of the fleeing deer. The animal crumpled onto the ground, and the other deer left it behind as they dashed out of sight. Black Nail turned around and saw Scamp holding an empty bow. There was a big happy grin on his face. I set that up for you, Black Nail told him flatly. It had probably been beginner's luck. Thanks boss, Scamp replied. He was still smiling, and that annoyed Black Nail. Since you shot it, you're carrying the carcass back, he told Scamp. Gob helped tie the deer to a long pole and then he and Scamp began carrying it back to base. As they walked, Black Nail told them stories about cedar and taught them little tracking tricks. If it looked like the other hobgoblins weren't paying enough attention then he kicked them in the ass, hard. He would tolerate no disrespect towards his old master. It hadn't been so long ago that Black Nail had been the one learning this way. A feeling of sad nostalgia came over the hobgoblin. He missed his master. It was starting to get dark by the time they returned to the goblin camp. The main cooking campfire was burning and so were a few of the smaller ones, like where Farrer was busy firing clay. The little goblin never seemed to stop burning things. Sure, fire looked pretty and all, but there were other things to life. The hobgoblins dropped the deer carcass over by the drying rack. The nearby goblins watched with interest and a hungry gleam in their eyes. The smell of blood was strong. Just as Black Nail was ordering Gob and Scamp to prepare the meat, Elias marched over. The goblins scattered out of his way as he walked up to Black Nail's side. What is it? Black Nail asked. Something must have happened. Elias almost never saw him. Out. I was doing my rounds and I found 4 sleeping goblins with signs of growing horns. That's what you told me to watch out for, the young man answered anxiously. Elias had been placed in charge of watching the goblins for signs of transformation. He had been a natural choice for the job, since he wasn't a goblin himself, he was already paranoid about hobgoblins, and it didn't take much in the way of intelligence. Black Nail arched his back and laughed. The shrill sound rang out above the camp. Goblins fell silent and looked his way with both curiosity and fear. Even Elias looked uncomfortable as the loud and human sound filled the air. Black Nail ignored them and shared his joy with World. Behind him, the campfire crackled and threw light up against the hills. Finally. He had waited so long. Things had been going infuriatingly slowly, but now his scheme was starting to pay off. He needed hobgoblins and now he was getting them. They were the entire reason he had bothered building up this grimy little base. He needed the goblins to be well fed and feel secure so they would transform. Still laughing, Black Nail contemplated the future. It was time to move on to the next part of his plan. Vengeance against Warwick would be his. He needed to rip the man apart with his own 2 hands. No one took what was his. It echoes onward 6. The sound of mad hobgoblin laughter cascaded through the rocky clearing. Black Nail was full of exhilaration now that his plans were finally coming to fruition. The laughter was just bubbling out of him. Nothing could stop him from getting his terrible revenge. What in all the hells is Black Nail up to? Did he get hit in the head? Kida asked as she scowled and walked over. She had a finger deep in one of her ears and was twisting it around. I wouldn't get too close. He might scratch you or something. He seems really wound up, Elias replied dryly. He was walking beside her. Black Nail stopped laughing and turned to glare at the 2 humans. They were ruining this for him. Well, whatever. He would get them back later, Elias especially. Black Nail had plans for him. Smiling smugly to himself, Black Nail ignored the humans and immediately went to work preparing for the next phase of his scheme. Now that he had built up his base enough to start producing hobgoblins, it was time to introduce a bit of chaos and excitement into the system. Chaos created opportunity, and Black Nail excelled at taking advantage of opportunities. The hobgoblin chieftain grabbed a sack from off the ground as he walked. He had no idea where it came from, but that didn't matter. Some goblin had probably stolen it from shelter. The next thing he needed was light, so the hobgoblin built a primitive torch from a branch and some dry rope and cloth. He wandered over to the clay firing pit to set it aflame, but his first few attempts failed to produce a usable amount of fire. The end of the torch just blackened and smoked. Imp has light, Farrer said from nearby. The goblin had been working but he had stopped to watch Black Nail's efforts. As usual, his eyes shone with perceptive intelligence. I know that, Black Nail muttered as he futilely poked the fire one last time. He didn't like failing in front of his minions. Stupid torch. The hobgoblin then threw his failed torch on the fire and headed for Imp's hut. It wouldn't surprise Black Nail if there was a torch or something among all the junk Imp had piled up there. He seemed to have everything else. There was a shuffling sound from inside as Black Nail walked up to the door. Imp was inside. He was walking around his home as he picked up and put down a plethora of small items. Every once in a while he would stop and stare intently into one of 2 large clay pots. Black Nail coughed to get his attention, and when Imp looked over he spoke up. Your leader me, is looking for a light so I can go into a dark cave. Give me light. Ah, I have that, Imp replied. He nodded enthusiastically and then walked over to a shelf. He picked something up off of it and then turned to show it to Black Nail. In the center of the hobgoblin's hand was a small transparent crystal. Oh, right, magic, Black Nail replied. He remembered those crystals, Mahedium had used to make them. Good job acquiring something so useful, Imp. I thought your bag was full of useless trash. No, I made this, Imp explained. You just need a pot, special dirt and blood. Hey, it's not going to blow up, is it? Black Nail asked warily as he took a step back. He then glanced nervously at the contents of all the nearby shelves. Mahedium's workshop had tended to explode every now and then. No, light stones don't go boom, only the more interesting and harder to make stones do that. I'm just growing light makers. The worst they do is cut your fingers with their sharp edges, or burn your eyes out and blind you. Just don't look directly at them for too long. Ah, that doesn't sound too bad, Black Nail mused aloud. Even the sun could blind you, and some of Black Nail's favorite possessions were designed to cut people. Imp quickly agreed to follow his glorious chieftain, and the pair headed over to the deepest cave in the camp. Since Black Nail wasn't a mage he couldn't use the light stone, and thus Imp had to come along. Cautiously, Black Nail jumped down the ledge that led to the cavern. He walked through the cave entrance and looked around. It was too dark for him to see anything inside, even though the sun was still shining brightly outside. He could barely make out the rock-studded walls of the dark tunnel, and the way forward was nothing but a murky black void. As Imp stepped up behind Black Nail, light flooded out to fill the tunnel. Suddenly, the cracks and crags in the grey stone walls were completely visible. Black Nail could see down into the cave until the way forward curved out of sight. The floor was dirty and uneven. Short spiky stalactites hung from the ceiling. Black Nail glanced back over his shoulder and saw Imp holding one hand up above his head. The light was pouring out from between the hobgoblin's fingers. Follow me, Black Nail ordered Imp as he turned back around and began walking deeper into the cavern. He was in no way afraid of the light going out and being stranded all alone in the dark. He was just going to keep very close to Imp. The two hobgoblins carefully made their way deeper into the cave. After only a few moments of scrambling over rocks and cracks in the floor, they reached their destination. The cave abruptly ended at a wall of loose rock. It looked like the ceiling had collapsed, but that wasn't why they were here. The light pouring out from Imp's stone was thrown back by something embedded in the cave wall. It sparkled with a yellowish tint. Ah, yellow shiny rocks, Imp observed as he leaned closer. It's called gold. Black Nail explained proudly. He still knew a lot of things that Imp didn't. The other hobgoblin wasn't as smart as he liked to pretend he was. It's pretty, but what is it for? Imp asked. He seemed sure they weren't here just to admire the view or get a new shiny trinket to play with. You use it to trick humans. They go all crazy when they see gold. All their favorite coins are made from it, Black Nail replied confidently. He didn't have a complete understanding of how currency worked, but he knew that was one of the most important parts. You want to trick some humans? No, I want to trick all of them, Black Nail explained as he spread his arms apart as if he was trying to grab something gigantic. There was a fierce smile on his face. Ah, that sounds like fun, Imp replied cheerfully as he studied the gold. He wasn't looking at Black Nail. You don't sound like you believe me, Black Nail observed crossly. Imp's lack of enthusiasm was a little insulting. When we leave I will show you how it works with Elias. You'll see, he's easy. Black Nail and Imp then spent a few minutes gathering up any loose yellow rocks they could find. The sack Black Nail had brought was just starting to get uncomfortably heavy, when he heard a wet sloshing sound from behind him. It was quickly followed by the thud of a falling rock. Both of the hobgoblins turned and looked at each other. Upon seeing that the other was just as confused as them, they both glanced over their shoulders. The noise had come from the barrier of fallen rock behind them. As they watched, there was another splashing sound from somewhere out of sight. You should check it out. In fact, I order you to, as the leader, Black Nail told Imp. If I die then we lose the light, and you're a much tougher fighter, Imp quickly countered. Those were good points. This was why Black Nail hated smart minions. He should have brought someone expandable, like a goblin. Ugh, fine, he muttered as he tiptoed over towards the source of the sound. It was probably a rat or something. The rocks in front of him were piled up on each other to form a steep slope. The light from the monostone didn't light it all up because its surface was so uneven. Instead, the uneven rocks were covered in slowly shifting shadows. There were several dark gaps in the rock that looked disconcertingly deep. Some of them might even penetrate right through the rocks and lead to a chamber on the other side of the collapse. A flash of movement and another wet sound drew Black Nail's attention. Something was moving on the other side of a tall grey rock. The hobgoblin leaned sideways to get a better look, just as something stepped into sight. The empty eye sockets of a human skull stared at Black Nail, and he stared back. What? Black Nail exclaimed in surprise. Below the skull, a frame of bones formed a complete standing skeleton. Did you know that human bones could walk around? Black Nail asked Imp as he stared at the sight before him and slowly reached down to draw his sword. Human remains didn't scare the hobgoblin all that much. Even living humans weren't typically that dangerous, and they were usually in much better shape than corpses, but it was better to be safe than sorry. I didn't know that. It seems a little weird. None of the other dead humans I've seen could walk, and goblin bones don't do that, Imp replied as he gazed past Black Nail. He sounded a little surprised. Maybe we both ate a bad mushroom. Before Black Nail could reply, the skeleton took a shambling step forward and Black Nail was forced to take a wary step back from it. The moving corpse was still mostly in the shadows, and he was in no hurry to fight it. How did you kill a pile of bones anyway? Here, let me help, Imp said. I don't think we're seeing it right. A second later, Imp held his hand out and the light he was holding grew much brighter. The white glow of the stone suddenly illuminated the skeleton as it stepped forward again, and Black Nail got a good look at it. Oh, it's covered in slime, he observed as he suddenly had a realization. The human bones were wrapped in transparent goo, and it was very familiar looking to Black Nail. Before he could finish his thought though, the skeleton suddenly lurched forward and swung an arm at him. Black Nail dodged under the blow and stabbed the attacking monster in the stomach. The blade sank into the slime and bounced harmlessly off of bone. The skeleton didn't appear to have been harmed. It ignored the blow and swung at him again. Black Nail was forced to throw himself back out of the way. His blade came free with a wet sucking sound. After stumbling, he caught his balance and raised his sword up into a guard. You could help, Black Nail hissed at Imp. How? I have no sword and I'm not touching that. It looks icky, he replied. Magic. We're standing a little close. The boom is big, Imp answered skeptically. Fine, I'll do it myself, Black Nail told him as he stepped in and took another swing the shambling pile of bones and ooze. The attack hit, but once again it accomplished next to nothing. The thick slime slowed the blow enough that the bones were barely damaged by the strike. This wasn't the first ooze monster Black Nail had ever fought, but this one was noticeably tougher than the last. Oozes usually had vulnerable organs, but this one's were protected by the skeleton's ribcage. The stolen human bones also allowed it to walk instead of rolling around, and its arms gave it some reach. Every time the skeleton flailed at Black Nail, tendrils rose off the monster's arms and reached for him. Again and again, Black Nail sliced and swung his sword but the ooze remained unfazed. The hobgoblin was forced to retreat as the skeleton lurched towards him with outstretched arms. If the slime got a hold of him, it would be difficult to get free and the monster would quickly squeeze the life from him. This fight wasn't going anywhere. The skeleton was too slow to hit Black Nail, but he couldn't hurt it either. He needed to change things up. Imp certainly wasn't helping. He was just standing back and watching the fight. That wasn't what minions were for. You're going to make me do this, aren't you? Black Nail muttered at Imp as he readied himself. A second later, he lunged towards the slime. He was holding his sword down low, and as he charged he thrust it towards the skeleton's chest with all his might. He needed to break some bones. Before the slime could react, Black Nail's sword slammed into its chest. The tip of the blade cut through the slime and hit a pair of ribs. For a moment, the bones seemed to stop the attack, but then they shattered. The blade slipped right through the skeleton's chest. Unfortunately for Black Nail, he couldn't stop his charge. He had built up way too much momentum. It carried him right into his opponent, and they both fell over in a tangle. Ugh, this feels icky. Black Nail cried after hitting the ground. The slime had already begun enveloping him. It had firm hold on him now, and that wasn't good. Suppressing his disgust, Black Nail let go of his sword and fought to keep one hand free. As the slime spread towards his face and pulled him down, the hobgoblin plunged his hand through the skeleton's broken ribs and began feeling around. The thick slime moved around his fingers and made it hard to tell if he was hitting anything. He needed to destroy the thing's organs. The ooze bubbled up and covered Black Nail's mouth. The hobgoblin couldn't get free now and he had only a few seconds left to find his opponent's weak spot. Where was the damned thing? He should have already grabbed it. This wasn't the first time Black Nail had stuck his hand inside a human chest cavity, it wasn't that large. A burning sensation flared to life within Black Nail's lungs. He couldn't breathe, or even get his hands loose so he could try to pry his mouth open. Where in all the hells was that organ? What did humans even mean when they talked about the hells? It was all so confusing. He was getting too weak. A loud cracking noise splintered the quiet, right next to Black Nail's head. He flinched and glanced in that direction. The sight of a shattered skull filled his vision. A large rock had smashed open the dome of the slime's stolen skull, and a pair of green hands was holding the rock. As Black Nail watched, black fluid began to leak out of the cracked remains of the skull's eye sockets, and the slime holding him went limp. The organ had been in the skull, not the chest. That was my plan all along. I set that up for you, Black Nail told Imp as he sat up and began coughing. There was slime in his throat. It did not taste great. Of course, boss. Your mighty struggle was amazing, Imp replied flatly. Black Nail wasn't sure if he was being sincere, but he was too tired and slimy to care right now. He stood up and began wiping himself off. The fallen skeleton was at his feet and the now inactive ooze was sloughing off of its bones. Before he was anywhere near clean, there was a scuttling sound from where the slime had come from. Both hobgoblins looked over to see a pale crab-like creature emerge from the rocks and stare back at them. It was the size of a large dog. Let's get out of here, Black Nail told Imp. The other hobgoblin didn't argue. Black Nail grabbed the sack of gold and they scrambled out of the cave. They had gotten what they had come for anyway, so there was no point in sticking around. The first thing Black Nail did after leaving the cave was to jump in a deep pool of water and change his clothes. Once all the slime had been washed away, Black Nail and Imp went to talk to Elias. They found the man sitting atop one of the hills at the edge of the camp. He was looking outward towards the forest, and his slouching posture made him seem tired and depressed. What a whiner. What do you want? Elias asked when he spotted the hobgoblins approaching. What do you want? Black Nail countered cheerfully. To leave and get back to civilization, Elias replied. He didn't sound amused. All right, I'll take you there. Are you being serious? Why would I lie? Because you find it amusing. Black Nail fought to keep the serious look on his face. Elias had him there, but that wasn't the case now. No, I want to take you back to human lands. Do you want to go? Like all the demons and all the hells are chasing me, Elias replied. His eyes had gone wide with surprise and hope. It was sort of cute, in a kickable way. Good, we leave tomorrow, Black Nail told the young man. The hobgoblin's lips had twisted into an amused grin. There are just 2 things you have to do for me. Oh. First, I command you to tell everyone about shelter. You need to convince people to come here. Ha, whatever floats your boat. Get me out of the wilds and I'll do anything you say. Black Nail grinned knowingly to himself. Elias thought he was being clever. Black Nail knew the man planned on running at the first chance he got. Why did humans always underestimate him? Yes, you will. You won't run or forget my orders because of the second thing I need from you. What's that? Elias asked cautiously. I need you to take this with you, Black Nail explained as he reached into the sack and pulled out a lump of yellow rock. When you've done as you've been told, I will give you more. That's highly suspicious, Elias observed as he stared at the gold. But I really can't say no. No. No, you can't, Black Nail replied as he winked at an impressed-looking imp. It echoes onward 7. Do you remember what you have to do? Black Nail asked. Yay, it's not that complicated, just stupid. Why are you doing this? Elias countered. The hobgoblin and the young man were standing outside of a small inn. Black Nail was hooded to conceal his unnaturally good looks, so that he wouldn't attract attention. After trudging back along the route through the forest they had taken to shelter, the pair had eventually found a major human road, which had led them here to this inn. The journey had taken a week and all of it had been long and boring. Black Nail had spent the entire time annoying Elias and making him do chores, most of which had been utterly pointless, but fun to watch. You don't need to know why I'm doing this. Just repeat your orders. It's important, Black Nail hissed at Elias. Fine, I'm supposed to find some of Warwick's men and tell them about shelter. I'm not supposed to mention you or any of Herod's old minions, but I have to tell them about there being heaps of gold there. Good, and do you remember what will happen if you don't obey my orders or mess this up by doing some stupid human thing? I remember. You promised to gut me like a fish and hang my nude corpse from a village gate, Elias replied dryly. You make me sound so mean. I'm just trying to help you remember everything properly. Motivation is important. Black Nail protested. Also, on that topic, don't think I won't find you if you try to run. I can follow you through a city. Herod's enemies weren't safe from me in Dagger Point. I hunted them down like rats. Rats? What? Never mind. I thought I was finally going to be free of you, Elias muttered under his breath as he turned towards the inn door. Black Nail's ears were sensitive enough to pick up his words, but he just smiled to himself. He didn't say anything as Elias disappeared through the door, leaving Black Nail alone on the long dusty road. The inn was an isolated building that served as a safe house for travelers. It was a solidly built structure that looked like it had been designed with defense in mind. There was a stable off to one side, and Black Nail could hear several horses neighing and whinnying inside it. The hobgoblin had to resist the urge to burn the whole thing down. Killing a few disgusting and obnoxious horses wasn't worth messing up his amazing plan. The stable did look really flammable though. There was hay everywhere. I paid for a good bed. I demand better than this, a woman yelled from inside the inn. The noise derailed Black Nail's train of thought. Well, Elias is finally back among his own kind, whiny people, so I should get moving, the hobgoblin told himself before turning and starting to walk away. He had a long journey ahead of himself. Without stopping, he traveled down the road for the rest for the day. By the time the sun was starting to set he had almost driven himself crazy. He was so bored. He hated being alone. He wasn't used to it anymore. Black Nail hissed in frustration as he looked down the road. Being the leader was pointless if there was no one to brag to or boss around. He already regretted leaving Elias behind, but he'd had no choice. The plan was more important than anything else. He would just have to find another human that was even more fun to torment. Boredom was one of the main reasons he hadn't become a feral hobgoblin after Cedar had died. It had been tempting to leave the whiny humans behind, but if he'd obeyed his instincts and ran off into the woods then there wouldn't be anyone for him to agonize or lord over. Being around stupid humans and shifty-eyed hobgoblins he couldn't trust was dangerous, but there was more to life than just living, like cheese. When night came, Black Nail pulled off his pack and unrolled his blanket. He was always able to find some sort of crevice or nook to sleep in. The forest was full of predators, but only a few of them hunted during the blackest part of the night, and fewer still would dare prey on a hobgoblin. By the third day, hiking along the dusty road past all the trees was really starting to get old. If he looked up, there were some clouds and some mountains on the horizon, but those weren't exactly riveting either. Black Nail found himself talking to random birds that were up in the trees. They chirped a lot but they didn't talk back. When Black Nail finally drew close to his destination, several more days had passed, and he was desperate for company. All the hobgoblins had been too busy to come with him, every goblin was worthless, and he'd rather swallow a spiny toad than spend so much time alone with Kida. However, he should have forced at least one of the hobgoblins to come along. There was several hours worth of hiking left until he got home, and they were going to be excruciatingly dull. Letting out a deep sigh, Black Nail passed underneath a huge slanted tree that overshadowed the path. The giant had partially fallen over some time ago, but it was still alive. The forest around the hobgoblin was quiet. The short leafy bushes and tall tree trunks around him were still. Suddenly, an uncomfortable tingle spread across Black Nail's back and up his neck. Was it perhaps too quiet? Wasn't there usually more birdsong and scurrying noises? Black Nail stopped walking. He turned to look around. Nothing seemed out of place, but he still felt on edge. Cautiously, Black Nail began walking again. He couldn't just wait around all day. He had places to be. If he was walking a little quicker than before it wasn't because he was afraid. That would be ridiculous. He was the hunter, not the hunted. Just then, Black Nail heard a rustling. It sounded like something was in the bushes, and creeping closer to him. He kept walking as if he hadn't heard anything, but he also surreptitiously glanced over his shoulder towards the noise. Out of the corner of his eye he saw a patch of grey fur. Black Nail began to walk a little faster and one of his hands grasped the hilt of his blade. He really should have brought someone else along. As he hustled along the path, Black Nail was careful to keep his eyes open and to walk close to tree trunks so one of his sides was covered. A snapping sound from behind him, like a twig breaking, reminded him that he was being followed. He needed to do something about that, but first he needed to figure out exactly what sort of situation he was in. Proper tactics were important. There was a huge tree up ahead. The giant stood alone, no bushes or other trees were within 24 feet of it. Its trunk was wider than Black Nail's arms and covered in pale smooth bark. Most importantly, there was a pair of low-hanging branches on it. Black Nail dashed forward towards the tree. When he reached it, he planted his feet, and drew his blade as he spun around. The sword whirred through the air until it came to a stop up in a guard position in front of Black Nail's face. The hobgoblin grimaced in determination as he took a defensive stance and prepared himself for combat. Immediately, there was an explosion of leaves, as several low shapes burst out from the underbrush. 4 of them were normal wolves, while the 5th was much larger and had a small crystalline horn on its head. It was the mutant wolf that attacked Black Nail's base. The alpha snarled as it led its pack mates in a charge towards the hobgoblin warrior. The beast's eyes shone with mad hunger. "Nope, bye," Black Nail exclaimed as he dropped his sword. The hobgoblin then turned and leaped towards the closest branch on the tree behind him. There was no way he was going to fight so many wolves by himself. As he grabbed the branch and began pulling himself up, one of the wolves jumped after him. "Ah, my butt. I need that," Black Nail screeched as a set of teeth grazed his ass and tore through his pants. The hanging hobgoblin flinched and quickly threw himself up out of the way. He landed on top of a solid branch, and then immediately jumped up to the next one, just in case. Only then did he stop and take a second to glance at the seat of his pants. There was a long gash through them, although the skin beneath had only been scratched. The wound hurt, though. His butt was a tender area, and the damage to his trousers annoyed Black Nail. He didn't have a lot of spare pairs of pants. They were difficult to loot unless you didn't mind them smelling really bad. In battle, humans leaked quite a few different fluids, none of which were fragrant. Beneath him, the alpha wolf leaped up onto the side of the tree and began scrambling up the bark. It growled as its jaws snapped on empty air. Up on his branch, Black Nail flinched again and leaned back away. However, the huge beast quickly lost its grip. It slipped back down to the ground and landed on all fours. "Ha, you're just a stupid mutt without any hands. Grow some thumbs, loser," Black Nail laughed as he stuck his tongue out. The alpha stared up at the hobgoblin. Its yellow eyes were narrowed hatefully. Black Nail spat down at it, but his wet projectile missed completely, and the alpha growled again. "Just wait, I got a present for you," Black Nail said as he rummaged around in his pouches for his sling. The wolf seemed to recognize the weapon, because as Black Nail began loading it, the beast let out a quick howl and then darted off back into the bushes. Its companions followed it, leaving Black Nail up the tree with nothing to shoot at. Several minutes passed. "Are they gone?" Black Nail muttered darkly to himself as he tried to peer through the undergrowth below. The wolves weren't visible, but that didn't mean they were really gone. They might be laying in ambush, waiting for Black Nail to come down so they could tear him to bits. The alpha had seemed like a cunning beast with a twisty mind. It wasn't truly intelligent, of course, but it was the next best thing, sort of like a human. Everything was quiet for several more minutes as Black Nail waited up in the tree. The longer he waited the more frustrated he grew. This was not how a great hobgoblin chieftain was supposed to spend his time. He was a hunter without equal, not a squirrel. He should be doing hobgoblin chieftain things, like sitting on a pile of skulls? Why didn't he have a pile of skulls? That sounded amazing. Wait, that was a problem for another time. He should focus on the situation at hand, the wolves. Black Nail thought over his options. He really only had two. Sit in the tree or climb down. They are probably gone. The dumb mutts probably lost interest and went to find something less dangerous to attack, Black Nail reassured himself before jumping down to the lower branch. He then carefully studied the nearby bushes before making the last leap down to the ground. When no slavering wolves jumped out at him, he picked his sword off the ground and resumed heading down the trail that led him back towards shelter. It wasn't like he had much choice. Before he had gone more than a few feet, a loud crash and a squeal echoed through the trees. He tensed, but it sounded like it was coming from far away. Was it the wolves? After stopping and listening, Black Nail decided to check it out. If the wolves were really making all the noise, he wanted to know what they were doing. He might be losing a chance to put some distance between himself and the beasts, but he much preferred being the hunter over the hunted. He wasn't about to let a bunch of arrogant dogs chase him all the way home. There was another loud squeal. Black Nail turned and began creeping towards the sound. He kept low and skulked through the bushes as he moved. His long green ears were erect as they listened for even the slightest sound. The tiniest warning could save him if this was a trick. Black Nail soon found what he was looking for. As he peered out from behind a tree, the hobgoblin saw an unfolding battle. There was a steep rocky cliff up ahead. At the base of the hill, the alpha wolf and several of its pack mates were circling around a herd of boars. One of the boars was a gigantic beast. It had dark brown fur with subtle black stripes and long pointy tusks. The giant towered over even the alpha wolf by 2 or 3 feet. The normal wolves looked small and harmless next to its huge girth. Around half a dozen smaller pigs were hiding behind their larger companion. They looked to be sticking close to a small crevice in the side of the hill and trying to keep out of the fight. With the support of his pack mates, the alpha was darting in to bite at the large boar's heels and exposed flank. It was smaller than its prey, but its speed and strength were unnatural. The alpha was having no trouble getting past the boar's defenses. It showed no fear, and its teeth were already wet with blood. Since no one and nothing was looking in his direction, Black Nail decided to circle around and get a better view. He headed up towards the hill. That seemed like a defensible spot and he would definitely get a good view up there. The sounds of battle continued behind him as he moved. There were several large rocks on top of the hill. Black Nail crept up behind the one closest to the edge and looked down. At the bottom of the rocky ridge, one of the smaller wolves dove into the melee. It lunged at the back of one of the boars as the alpha distracted it, but it was too slow. The boar turned and headbutted the wolf before it could pull back. The wolf whined in pain as it was sent flying and hit a tree. This enraged the alpha wolf. It growled angrily, jumped on the boar's back, and sank its long sharp teeth into the beast's neck. Another loud squeal filled the air as the boar bucked and tried to shake itself free. The other wolves took the opportunity to jump in and began harassing the smaller pigs. A ragged din of high-pitched squealing and hungry growls quickly filled the air. As Black Nail watched all this, he weighed his options. It certainly seemed like the wolves were going to win, and that wasn't good for him. They had already attacked both him and his tribe. Briefly, he considered stringing his bow and taking a shot at the alpha, but it would probably take more than an arrow or two to hurt a mutant like that. Black Nail's attention was drawn back to the fight, when the boar finally managed to dislodge its attacker. It spun itself around in tight circle and the alpha came loose and hit the ground. The wolf rolled a few times before getting back to its feet, but the boar was already charging. The wolf tried to jump out of the way, but the huge pig managed to graze its foe. Its tusks cut into the wolf's side and drew blood. However, the now bloodied mutant was far from out of the fight. It calmly landed and began circling the boar again. Its yellow eyes were alive with excitement, not pain. The boar was the one that seemed to be on its last legs. It was huffing and puffing fitfully as it limped around. It looked ready to collapse at any second. Up above, Black Nail frowned to himself. The alpha was wounded and its pack mates were hurt and distracted. Black Nail knew he would likely never have a better chance than this to even the score. He needed to come up with a plan, one that would actually work. The rock Black Nail was leaning on suddenly shifted ever so slightly, and a new idea occurred to the hobgoblin. He grinned maliciously to himself as he looked around for a branch. He quickly found one he could use, so he jammed it under the large rock and began pushing. There was a low crack as the boulder came loose and began rolling down the hill. It hit several smaller stones on the way down and a small rock slide formed. The wave of jagged rock hurtled downwards at the beasts below. Black Nail laughed joyfully at the sight and rubbed his hands together in glee. Down below, the alpha finally looked up and away from his lagging foe. The noise from all the fighting animals had been drowning out the sound of the rocks until they got closer. Black Nail was sure he saw a terrified expression appear on the wolf's face for a moment, before it howled fearfully and turned to run away. Too late. You're going to get smushed flat, Black Nail yelled down at the mutant. There was a savage victorious grin on his face. No dog was ever going to get away with hurting him. That grin faltered though, when the ground beneath Black Nail's feet suddenly shifted. He lost his balance. There was a loud grinding noise from below, and then the part of the hill Black Nail was standing on began to come apart and slide down the slope. Ah, harpy shit, the hobgoblin cursed as he fell. It echoes onward 8. Small stones bounced through the air all around Black Nail as he slid down the side of the hill. He desperately fought to keep his balance, but the rocks beneath his feet kept moving. All he could do was to try not to hit anything on the way down. A large rock rose before him, so the hobgoblin jumped to the side. After landing, he had to reach down and catch himself, but he barely managed to keep from falling on his ass as he slid down the slope. At the bottom of the hill, the first wave of stones reached the beasts fighting down below. Most of the shards were small and harmless, but there were some larger ones, including the original boulder Black Nail had knocked free. That huge rock was rolling right towards the alpha wolf. The mutant wolf had turned and fled from his fight with a huge boar a few moments ago, when it had noticed the incoming rock slide. The injured boar was too exhausted to escape, and it knew it. Instead of running, it turned to face the rocks and hunkered down. The other wolves and pigs were fleeing in all directions. The wave of stones washed over the huge boar and then rushed past it without slowing. Wolves and pigs were thrown in every direction and crushed by rock. The alpha wolf dodged to the side to avoid the huge boulder, but then a smaller rock smashed into its head. The mutant canine was sent rolling across the ground and was then hit by a shower of smaller stones. Black Nail would have cheered but he was too busy trying to keep himself in one piece. The hobgoblin was still sliding down the slope amidst a wave of dust and rock. Most the large rocks were in front of him but that didn't mean he was safe. There was a lot of momentum carrying him down the hill, and even a small rock could crack open his skull. A few moments and some near misses later, the hobgoblin reached the bottom of the hill. He leaped over a pile of rocks and then kept running as he weaved his way forward past all the obstacles. As he ran, Black Nail tried to backpedal and slow himself down, but his momentum was too strong. Then he stepped on a small round stone. Oh no, the hobgoblin said as he tripped and his foot flew up into the air. This was going to hurt. It did. Black Nail hit the uneven ground hard. More than a few sharp stones dug into the flesh of his back. He gasped painfully as he started rolling. Even more pointy objects stabbed into him as he rolled. When he finally came to stop, a cloud of gravel fell on top of him. Ouch, Black Nail groaned as he picked himself up. He then spat to one side. His mouth was full of dust. It tasted like he'd tried to chew rocks. The hobgoblin looked around. There were several large dust clouds hanging low close to the ground but they were already beginning to blow away. Loose rocks were strewn about everywhere, but Black Nail saw no immediate threats, so he took a second to check his body for injuries. He had quite a few new tender areas, but nothing seemed broken. It would take more than a mere rock slide to defeat Black Nail. With his checkup done, Black Nail went looking for the alpha wolf. The creature had definitely been hit by the rock slide and it had already been wounded. This was far too good of a chance to pass off. The wolf was probably already dead, but if it wasn't, Black Nail was going to finish it off. This was his territory and no mutant was going to get away with attacking him. The pile of rocks covering his target wasn't that far away, so Black Nail headed over towards it. He smacked the side of his head a few times to get the rocks out of his ears as he walked. He had no idea how they had gotten in there. The fallen body of the giant boar was off to one side. It looked even bigger from up close, but it also looked very dead. Large bleeding gashes had been torn in its sides and it was breathlessly still. Since it wasn't a concern, unless he got hungry, Black Nail turned away from the boar and focused on the wolf up ahead. As Black Nail walked, he drew his sword. The alpha wolf had been hit by a wave of rock, so it was probably long dead, but Black Nail wasn't about to underestimate a mutant. They could be freakishly tough. He might have to stick it a few times to finish it off. He hoped he would. That sounded like fun. I'm going to make me a wolf fur blanket and maybe a pretty tooth necklace too, the hobgoblin bragged as he smiled confidently. The hobgoblin approached the buried alpha wolf, and kicked a stone away. He couldn't see much of the wolf beneath the rock, only a few patches of fur. Suddenly, the entire mound shuddered and began to rise. Rocks fell away to reveal the back of a huge furry shape. Black Nail took a step back. He didn't like where this was going. The creature then turned and looked at the hobgoblin. It was without a doubt the alpha wolf, and it looked mad. Its yellow eyes were narrowed hatefully at Black Nail. A few bit stripes of blood decorated its fur, but it didn't seem all that wounded. As the hobgoblin watched, the creature's fur seemed to darken and go flat. The sudden change made it obvious the wolf's fur had been weirdly fluffy and shiny a moment ago. The wolf shook itself to remove some of the dust and dirt that covered its body, and then it snarled menacingly. Its lips rose up to reveal the many sharp teeth in its maw as the menacing sound reached Black Nail's ears. Cheater, Black Nail remarked resentfully. He then reached into a padded pocket in his shirt and pulled out a thick glass vial. It was his last vial of elixir. He hurriedly popped the cork and downed the pink contents. He had a feeling he was going to need it. The alpha had obviously used some sort of weird power to protect itself. The wolf was still fairly dirty and it shook itself again. Black Nail didn't waste the opportunity. A hot flash of energy went through his body as he burned elixir and lunged forward. His sword whirred around into a downward slash that was aimed right at his opponent's neck. Black Nail moved with incredible speed, but the wolf didn't even try to dodge. Instead, it held its ground and growled. The fur all along its body instantly puffed out and grew shinier. It almost looked like crystalline spikes. The sword hit the fur and was violently repelled. The force of the blow recoiled up Black Nail's arm. The sword vibrated in his hand for an instant and then it shattered. Bits of metal flew away as the blade was snapped in half. Not good, Black Nail hissed as he stared at his now completely destroyed weapon. This wasn't going the way he had planned. He hated magic. A moment later, the wolf's fur softened and went flat again, and it lunged at the hobgoblin. Its jaws opened wide to reveal jagged yellow teeth, black gums, and a long slimy tongue. Black Nail immediately threw himself out of the way. The mutant's teeth snapped shut on the empty air where his head had been a brief moment ago, and a drop of warm drool splashed against his neck. As panic caused his heart to speed up, Black Nail threw his broken sword down and drew a long dagger. He was just in time. The wolf attacked again. It came in low to snap at his feet, but Black Nail managed to twist to the side and slash at the creature's head. The power of the elixir was already seeping into his body and lightening his movements, and this time his blade cut through the fur and drew blood. However, the glancing blow only left a shallow scratch. Both combatants stepped back and eyed each other. Black Nail knew he was in danger, but trying to flee never even occurred to him. He was face to face with another predator. Backing down would only put him at a disadvantage. He had to win no matter what the cost. The potent energy from the elixir was rushing through Black Nail's body. It threw his mind into overdrive. His first attack had been completely ineffective, but the second had worked. It seemed like the beast's fur was only tough when it was shiny. The wolf also moved slower then, so it transformed its hair only as a last-ditch defense. Black Nail could use that, somehow. The wolf let out a deep growl as it began to circle around the hobgoblin. Its every step brought it slightly closer, and Black Nail had to continue turning to keep his eyes locked on it. Before he got dizzy, Black Nail snarled and slashed at the wolf. It was only a feint, but the beast jumped back out of the way. Sensing an opportunity, Black Nail drew another dagger and whipped it at the mutant's head. The knife spun as it whirred through the air, and then it sailed right over the wolf's head and hit a tree. The blade didn't even sink into the wood, it bounced off into a nearby bush. Yay, I never really learned how to do that right, Black Nail muttered to himself in disappointment. It had looked really cool when he saw bandits do it, though. The throw wasn't a complete waste. The startled wolf ducked low and its fur went spiky again for a second, but then it realized the hobgoblin had missed, and it growled at him again. Black Nail growled back and raised his dagger menacingly. He was feeling confident. The elixir was flowing through his body and strengthening it. He felt no pain or weariness. So what if the wolf was a mutant? He was Black Nail, the greatest hobgoblin warrior in the history of ever. He had no equal. Black Nail lunged forward to attack again. He slashed at his opponent's eyes. The wolf tried to twist around the attack and get at Black Nail, but the hobgoblin was ready. He reversed the direction of his slash and drove the beast off. The wolf's yellow eyes focused on Black Nail as it hunched down, and an instant later the wolf leapt up. It jumped straight for the hobgoblin's chest. Black Nail grinned in bloody anticipation as he aimed his dagger at the creature's exposed throat, but then its fur rose up again and hardened. At the last moment, the hobgoblin was forced to throw himself down. He rolled across the ground and away from the wolf. Unfortunately, the mutant landed and spun around before he could get back up. With a victorious growl, it charged. Black Nail raised an arm to shield his head, and the wolf's jaws closed down on it. Teeth sank through his heavy leather coat and into his arm. Bloody gods and piss everywhere, Black Nail gasped as the pain hit him. Instead of flinching though, he channeled his pain into anger. With lightning-like speed he stabbed at one of the wolf's eyes with the dagger in his other hand. His mind wasn't muddled by fear or pain, but focused by them instead. The here and now was all that mattered. He had to win. The dagger's tip headed right for the wolf's iris, and the wolf reacted immediately. Instead of letting go, it dropped its weight and pulled Black Nail off balance. The hobgoblin stumbled and clenched his jaw as the beast's teeth dug deeper into his flesh. Black Nail's attack missed, but he didn't waste any time. He growled as he slashed at the wolf's eyes again. This time, the beast twisted around and let go of his arm. The action caught Black Nail by surprise. He was thrown violently to the side and flew through the air until he hit the ground and started rolling. Disorientated, his body knocked aside loose rocks. He reached with his hands and tried to grab something, but then a solid object smashed into the back of his head. There was a loud crack. Black Nail's head jerked forward and his neck twisted. For a moment, everything seemed fine. It was just another minor wound. The fight was still going on, and he couldn't back down. Black Nail growled as he tried to stand up, but then his body suddenly went limp. As he fell, his vision went black. Black Nail was sinking into cold nothingness. Like chains, the darkness held him down. It was so cold that even thinking was hard. What was going on? Who was he? A ring of stones rose up into sight. The darkness rippled away from them like black water. Crude symbols decorated the weathered grey monoliths. Their lines and whirls were hypnotic even though they held no meaning to Black Nail. He remembered seeing something like them once. Then there was light. At first it was a pinprick, but it grew until a blazing sun hung overhead. A giant appeared in the light. The blaze behind it obscured its features, but it was looking down at Black Nail. The hobgoblin could feel it studying him with unseen eyes that pierced everything. He felt acceptance instead of judgment, but that didn't matter to him. He didn't care what anyone else thought. Actions were what mattered. Suddenly, one of the stones began to topple. As it fell, it hit the next one in line, and that stone began to fall. Soon the entire ring would collapse. All the commotion energized Black Nail. He began to struggle against the cold waters dragging him down. He couldn't afford to stay here. He had plans. He had no idea what those plans were, but he remembered having them. The giant noticed the flailing. It reached down with one dark hand and grabbed Black Nail. There was a sucking sound as it dragged him out of the cold water. Then, just as the third stone was beginning to fall, the giant took the hobgoblin and wedged him beneath the stone so that it stopped falling. Black Nail felt a heavy weight push down on him. He couldn't see his own body but he felt it shift and deform under the pressure ever so slightly. There was a popping sound, and he opened his eyes. Black Nail was lying on his back. Fragmented flashes of some sort of vision or dream ran through his mind. Had he fallen unconscious for a second? There was a rock poking painfully into his side, and a huge mutant wolf jumping at his face. Normally that would mean he had but a few scant moments to live, but everything seemed to be moving very slowly, like he was underwater. The wolf hung suspended in the air. Black Nail could clearly see its grey fur, yellow teeth, and long claws. The hobgoblin knew his body was too battered and bruised to react properly. He wouldn't be able to avoid the wolf's attack in time. Death seemed certain, but Black Nail wasn't about to give up. Purpose filled him. Vengeance still smoldered within his heart, but it was more than that. He would live. He would conquer. If his body wasn't up to the task then he would simply find another way. Time continued to pass, even if it was at a slower rate. The wolf was closer now. Soon it would land atop Black Nail and its jaws would close down on his neck. The elixir was still coursing through the hobgoblin's body. Black Nail could feel its energy empowering every fiber of his being. With no other option, he drew on every bit of it he could gather up. It burned within him with nowhere to go. The energy was too much. His muscles couldn't burn it nearly fast enough. The pressure built up and began to rip the hobgoblin apart from the inside. Just when Black Nail was sure he was about to burst, the energy found an escape. The power surged into Black Nail's head and then exploded outward. There was a path for it there that had only ever seen a trickle, but now it was being flooded. Invisible energy struck towards the wolf and ripped into it. Time sped back up. Birds exploded out of all the nearby trees and flew up into the sky. The wolf yelped in surprise and began to writhe in midair. Instead of landing on Black Nail, it hit the ground next to him on an awkward angle. There was loud thud as its back slammed into the ground. Its fur was standing up so straight that it looked sharp in places. Black Nail was already moving. He threw himself atop the writhing wolf without any care for his own safety. Rage drove him. This place was his, and he was the strongest. A claw scraped against Black Nail's chest but he twisted around it so he could get in closer. The wolf seemed to recover from whatever had confused it. It tried to push away from the hobgoblin and get back on its feet, but its thick fur slowed it down and restricted its movements. As the last remnants of elixir burned up within him, Black Nail grabbed a tuft of fur on the wolf's neck, pulled himself over, and then stabbed at the creature's closest eye with the dagger in his hand. There was no oddly tough fur there. The blade sank into the fleshy orb, and then Black Nail twisted the blade in deeper. Blood poured out of the wound, and the wolf yelped. The beast's hind legs hit Black Nail hips and knocked him aside. He lost his grip on his weapon, and he landed off to one side of the wolf. The furious hobgoblin immediately tried to get back up, but his muscles suddenly gave out on him. He stumbled before managing to get back on his feet. Meanwhile, the wolf flailed about. It seemed to try to scratch the sky for several seconds, but then it let out a deep wheezing breath and flopped down onto its side. Black Nail drew another dagger from within his coat and stared at the beast for several long seconds, but it lay still. Ha, now you're dead. Stupid mutt, the hobgoblin exclaimed viciously. He then spat a mixture of blood and mucus to the side and collapsed into a sitting position on the ground. He was really tired all of a sudden. It had been a long day. It echoes onward 9. The sound of his own deep breathing filled Black Nail's ears as he sat among the loose rocks from the landslide. The corpse of the huge boar lay behind him and in front of him was the fallen body of the mutant wolf. The bloody beast was finally dead. Black Nail had killed it. Not that the outcome had ever been in question. Sure, the monster had been tough, but Black Nail was a master ranger and swordsman. He could beat anything. Now, Black Nail was taking a quick break. The energy from the fight and the elixir were starting to wear off. Pain was beginning to flare up as Black Nail lost the numbness caused by his rage, and he had more than a few injuries. The wolf had gotten in several good blows and had bitten Black Nail's arm quite hard. The hobgoblin had also fallen down a hill and hit the back of his head against a rock so hard he lost consciousness. He was probably going to need to stitch himself up. It was a good thing he'd managed to stun the wolf with that thingy. Wait, had he just used elixir to do some sort of special magic? I'm magic. Black Nail remarked in excitement as he perked up. Ow, the sudden motion had hurt his neck. All vessels were technically magic users. That's why they had increased strength and speed, but real magic was flashier than that. What was the point unless you could do something impressive like breath fire? Now I'm the greatest magic hobgoblin warrior ever. Black Nail announced proudly to the empty air. And I'm the leader. What exactly had he done, though? The wolf had seemed to spasm in panic. The hobgoblin hadn't shot fire out of his eyes or zapped it with magic death beams, but whatever he had done had also scared the nearby birds in flight. Scared? Was that it? Had he simply used magic to terrify the wolf into running away? That sort of sucked. He wanted to shoot fire out of his eyes. Well, at least he was alive and could brag about having real magic. He might even be able to use it to finally get Kidda to leave him alone. Maybe his power wasn't so bad, even if it wasn't fancy looking. There were probably a lot of great and terrible things he could accomplish with such a power, like jumping out at people to scare them silly. He couldn't wait to see the faces of some of his human minions. Oh, wait, Black Nail suddenly muttered to himself. He had a problem. He was out of elixir now. He had used his entire last vial to fight the wolf, and Black Nail had no idea where to find more. He couldn't ask Mahedium. The sun overhead was heating up Black Nail's clothes, so he got up and shuffled under a nearby tree. Once there, he pulled off his torn clothes and took out some supplies. His wounds needed looking after. Black Nail gritted his teeth as he applied stinging ointment to himself and sewed up the deeper cuts. When that was done, he took a seat on a large root that jutted out from the bottom of the tree, leaned back, and closed his eyes. He needed a quick break. No strange dreams overcame him as he rested in the cool shade. The birds resumed their chirping and a breeze blew through the trees. The tired hobgoblin nodded off. Time passed. A shuffling sound intruded into Black Nail's sleepy mind. He lazily opened one eye and looked around for the source. There was movement a few feet away, over where he'd dropped his bag. Someone was going through it. Was that Scamp? Black Nail stared at the hobgoblin. It was Scamp. As Black Nail watched, Scamp finished rummaging through the bag. The other hobgoblin pulled a knife out of the sack and then causally ambled over towards Black Nail. He was still holding the knife up, as if he had plans to use it. What are you doing here? Black Nail hissed angrily as he opened his eyes. He wasn't sure what Scamp was planning, and because he was a hobgoblin he was untrustworthy. Oh, you're awake, Scamp remarked in surprise as he hid the knife he was holding behind his back. Answer the question. You were making a lot of noise. Rocks go boom and stuff. We could hear you at base, so Gob made me come here and check it out. I've been hunting a lot lately. Sometimes Gob doesn't let me back inside the camp unless I bring meat back with me. He's mean. And why we're going through my bag? In case there was something dangerous in there. Scamp replied uncertainly. You never know. Black Nail rolled his eyes. He may be injured and tired, but he could still beat up Scamp without any real problems. The only reason he didn't was because he wanted someone to carry his gear. Scamp couldn't do that with a broken limb or two. Give me my dagger back, Black Nail said as he climbed to his feet and held out his hand. Scamp smiled sheepishly and did as he was told. As Black Nail was tucking the blade away, 3 goblins approached the hobgoblins. They were from the camp and had clearly come with Scamp. Come look, little beasts, the leader of the group announced excitedly as he threw his hands up above his head. Neither Black Nail nor Scamp had any idea what he was talking about, so they followed the energetic goblin over to the base of the hill. There were rocks everywhere now, but Black Nail recognized the spot that the boars had been protecting. Another goblin was standing just outside of the small fissure there. Black Nail pushed the others aside and peered inside. He immediately spotted what the goblin had been talking about. There were 9 small piglets tucked away in the back of the hole. They were all piled on top of each other for warmth and their little pink snouts stuck out from the mass of their brown striped fur. I'm taking these, Black Nail announced as he reached in and pulled one of the critters out. The little thing squinted up at the hobgoblin and then let out an unimpressed grunt. Why? Scamp asked. They look tasty and since they aren't dead yet they will stay fresh for a while. You're the boss. Yep, that's me, Black Nail agreed as he put the piglet back with the others. There was no point sticking around. Black Nail had recovered somewhat from his fight with the wolf. Whatever elixir had been left in his system had all been used up to help him heal. He was in far from perfect shape but he wasn't about to collapse either. His wounds remained but they were no longer bleeding or limiting his movements. At Black Nail's command, goblins rounded up the piglets and the corpse of the alpha wolf. They hung the large carcass from a long pole so that 4 goblins could all carry it together. It was very heavy, but there was no way Black Nail was going to leave his trophy behind. He planned on shoving it in everyone's faces. They all had to know how great he was. This meant that they had to leave a lot of good meat behind, but since they were only a short journey from camp, Black Nail planned on sending some of his minions back to grab them later. The group's journey back to the goblins' camp took a while because they were burdened by their cargo. Black Nail led the way because he was the leader, and he didn't set a fast pace. The constant stops were for safety and not because he was tired or weak in any way. Anyone who suggested that would have instantly regretted making such a slanderous insinuation. The last stop Black Nail made was right at the edge of the forest that bordered the clearing which contained the goblin base. The sight of his camp surprised him. It had changed a lot while its glorious leader had been away. The most obvious difference was the wall. Except for the gap that served as the entrance, the wall completely blocked the way into the base. The tall barrier of wooden stakes looked crude, but it was still imposing. Dangerous animals would have a much tougher time attacking the goblin camp now, which was good because Black Nail had to live there, and he'd dealt with enough of those for now. It looked like Gob had managed to keep everyone busy while Black Nail had been gone. Past the wall, 2 more longhouses were being built among the hills. That meant the base would soon have 4 of the long wooden structures. There were also some smaller constructions that Black Nail didn't recognize, and the entire camp was a hive of activity. Goblins were running around everywhere. There were even 4 goblins standing outside the break in the wall. Black Nail couldn't tell if they were on guard or just hanging around there. They had spears, but they seemed to be zoning out or talking amongst themselves, because none of them had spotted the approaching group of goblins and hobgoblins yet. Suddenly, 2 of the goblins turned on each other and began fighting. They hissed furiously as they wrestled across the ground. Black Nail made a mental note to make sure he posted a hobgoblin or human on watch duty in the future if there was any real looming threat. The goblins on watch were so focused on fighting or watching the fighters in their midst that they didn't see Black Nail's party. They were right in front of them. "Get out of the way, you stupid runts. I'm the leader." Black Nail hissed back as he walked over. The fighting goblins were blocking the entrance. The goblins immediately sprang into action. The 2 fighters separated and all the goblins lined up to stand at attention. It was way too late for them to look even remotely competent. Scamp chuckled at them but shut up when Black Nail threw him a glare. As if he was any better. After entering the camp, Black Nail ordered the goblins carrying his trophy to deposit over by the larder. He then dismissed Scamp and headed over to his cave. The idea of taking another nap on his comfy sleeping roll sounded really nice. However, on the way there he noticed something odd. Black Nail studied a group of 7 goblins that were hanging out in the shade under a rock. The little green critters were wearing crude clothing made from small tanned hides that had been sewed together. 2 of them had stone axes and 3 of them were sipping water from clay cups, or at least Black Nail assumed it was water. Looking around, Black Nail spotted several other groups just like it. That was a lot of goblins, way more than he had seen before. Since entering the camp he must have seen over 200 goblins, and very few of them looked like new arrivals. Most of them had tools and clothes. Black Nail was thinking this over when he arrived at the entrance to his cave. He immediately noticed that Gob was waiting for him there. The hobgoblin lieutenant looked much the same, although he was now wearing a human shirt and ripped human pants. The sword Black Nail had given him was hanging at his side, which reminded Black Nail that he had to replace his own broken blade. "I rejoice at your return, Great One. I saw the corpse of the wolf you laid low. Your warrior might is beyond belief." Gob exclaimed happily when Black Nail got close. "Yay, I'm amazing. I want to sleep now, though. You can compliment me later." "You're hurt. Was it the wolf?" Gob remarked in surprise after studying Black Nail for a second. "I'm fine. I just need some rest." "Yes, boss. If you desire anything then just say so. I will do it." "Well, you seem to be doing a good job. Keep it up," Black Nail told him. Gob was one of his most useful minions. "Whenever I have a problem I just ask myself what a great leader such as you would do." "That sounds like the best thing you could do. You're very smart to have figured that out yourself," Black Nail told him. "Did anything important happen while I was gone?" The 4 new hobgoblins woke up and 5 more goblins fell asleep. "You should probably meet them," Gob answered. 5 new goblins were transforming? That was more than Black Nail had expected so soon. His plan only called for around a dozen. At this rate he was going to end up with far more than he could easily control. "That is important, but so is napping. They've waited a few days already so they can wait one more," Black Nail remarked thoughtfully. "Also, I was wondering about all these goblins. Why are there so many new ones around?" Gob shrugged before replying. "They just showed up after the wall was built. Every night they come in from the forest. I made sure to put them to work, as I thought you would wish." "Lazy good-for-nothings," Black Nail hissed. The goblins must have realized how much safer it was inside the wall and were taking advantage of all the hard work he had put into making it. He hadn't built it so every little green pest in the forest could relax inside at his expense. There wasn't anything he could do about it now, though. "I will make sure all the goblins work hard to serve you, Chief," Gob replied enthusiastically. Black Nail hadn't actually been asking him to do anything, but whatever. "Kida isn't around, is she?" "No, the loud human female went to shelter when you left." "Okay, good," Black Nail replied before yawning. He didn't want the pest interrupting his sleep. Since there wasn't anything else pressing to talk about, Black Nail shooed Gob away and pushed aside the hide covering the entrance to his cave. He then entered and went to sleep on his bed. With the soft cloth beneath him, he was unconscious as soon as he had closed his eyes. Sunlight was streaming in through the cave entrance when Black Nail woke up the next morning. He yawned and stretched as he opened his eyes and looked around. His wounds felt much better. They had scabbed over and were a little stiff, but they didn't hurt at all. The sound of quiet breathing drew Black Nail's attention. He instinctively focused on it and looked for the source, in case it was prey. It wasn't, it was Kida. She was sleeping in her bed on the other side of the cave. Black Nail stared at her in incomprehension for several long seconds, before throwing his blankets aside and walking over to her. She was supposed to be at shelter. There was no way she could have traveled to the goblin camp overnight. Wake up! Black Nail growled as he shook her shoulder. Oh, Black Nail, you are finally awake, Kida told him as she sat up and blinked the sleep from her eyes. What are you doing here? I was told you were at shelter. I came as soon as I heard you were back. It's been so boring here without you. You're the only person here who isn't an idiot or a coward, but when I got here you just slept for 2 whole days. Black Nail groaned. It wasn't the next morning at all. He had wasted so much time. The hobgoblin quickly left Kida behind and ran out of the cave to find Gob. He had things to do. His plan was already in motion and wouldn't wait for him. Once he had found Gob, Black Nail had his minion take him to see the new hobgoblins. They had been receiving some training from Gob, but only Black Nail could do it right. They wouldn't properly fear him unless he was the one beating them. None of the new hobgoblin looked or smelled familiar to Black Nail. They hadn't stood out as goblins. All 4 of them were dressed the same and wearing loincloths. Gob had probably ordered them to make the clothing themselves. Despite the similarity in their dress though, they were easy to tell apart. The first 2 hobgoblins were very similar to each other. They both had long lanky builds and short fuzzy hair on the top of their heads. One had brown hair while the other had grey hair, though. They eyed Black Nail with suspicion as they studied their chieftain with fresh eyes. The pair could probably be trained to obey, though. The third hobgoblin was a bit shorter and still had some meat on his bones. He also had a small pot belly and was bald like Black Nail. The hobgoblin's pudgy form was unusual since the hobgoblin transformation normally consumed all of a goblin's fat. He must have been quite large before his transformation. His expression was guarded but not unfriendly. He seemed to have some measure of self-control already, which Black Nail approved of. The last new hobgoblin was also a little short, but his body was thin instead of fat. He had thick black hair that was long enough it got in his eyes. There was a creepily excited grin on his face as he returned Black Nail's stare. He didn't know what to make of it. Was this another goblin with a weird obsession, like Farrer? Black Nail then looked down at the hobgoblin's body. He froze in surprise. Were those breasts? They were. This hobgoblin had a pair of small but noticeable breasts. Understanding dawned on Black Nail as he stared at the naked tits for an uncomfortably long time. This hobgoblin was a female. It echoes onward 10. It took a few seconds for Black Nail's brain to start working again. During that time he continued to stare at the female hobgoblin in front of him. She was standing in line with the other 3 new hobgoblins. Ah, I see, Black Nail mused to himself to fill the awkward silence. He had been planning on acting tough in front of the new recruits, but he had been thrown off track. Why was this such a surprise anyway? It wasn't like Black Nail hadn't considered the idea of female hobgoblins before. He had. It was just that he'd grown used to all of the new hobgoblins being male. Why now had one finally appeared now? There were as many female goblins as there were male ones. So, you're a female, he told her. Yes, I am, she replied. The female hobgoblin's eyes shone with excitement as she stared directly at Black Nail. Her intensity was a little unnerving. Good, Black Nail mused aloud. He knew he sounded stupid, but he couldn't help himself. Why are you a hobgoblin? Don't know. I just follow you around everywhere and watch you all the time, and eventually I became like you, she answered him. Hey, I don't remember you, Black Nail replied uncertainly. No reason a great one such as you should. I was small and unworthy. I stayed back. I avoided other goblins that would distract me. Ah, that makes sense, Black Nail told her while he forced a smile. That didn't make sense. He was getting a weird vibe from this female. The hobgoblin chieftain coughed and took a step back so he could see all the new hobgoblins. He shouldn't focus on just one of them. I'm going to give you all names now, he told them. We have names already, one of the 2 lanky hobgoblins remarked as he looked at the other. You do? Goblins don't usually give themselves names, Black Nail replied. He was more than a little surprised. Normally, Black Nail only named hobgoblins because no one else did. If they wanted to name themselves, that was fine with him. Coming up with good names that everyone had to use forever was sort of annoying anyway. It was too bad he couldn't just name them all Gob. That was a great name for a hobgoblin. No, we gave each other names, the second lanky hobgoblin explained. I call him Twig Arms. And I call him Bone Face, the other added with a smile. Were they being serious? Black Nail scowled at both of them. Why would they insult themselves? This had better not be a joke at his expense, or they were going to get it. His look didn't go unnoticed. Boneface quickly spoke up to explain. We fight and insult each other a lot. Well, those names are still too annoying to say. You're Bones and Twig now, Black Nail told them before turning to the third hobgoblin. Do you have a name? He asked him. No. Then now you're Rolly, because you're almost as fat as a human, Black Nail told him. Sure, the chubby hobgoblin replied as he shrugged. He didn't seem to care all that much. What about me? You're giving me a name, right? It will be a connection between us, forever, the female goblin asked. How about you name yourself? Black Nail suggested. He didn't know what to call her. His mind kept going back to Tits, but he didn't think that would work well. You should name me, she insisted. Since he apparently didn't have a choice, Black Nail racked his mind for a name that wasn't Tits. I think I'll have to name you later. It's hard, he told her. He wasn't coming up with anything. The weird way she was staring at him wasn't helping him think either. Because it's so important to you. Sure. This made her smile fiercely enough that Black Nail grew uncomfortable again. He looked away and addressed the entire group. He ordered them to remain loyal to him and explained that he would be taking over their swordsmanship training. And if you disobey, then I will make your skulls into cups, Black Nail said as he finished up his motivational speech. It had been one of his better ones. Any questions? The other hobgoblins wisely remained silent, except for the female. Want a sex? She asked him. Right now. Black Nail replied uncertainly. Her sudden question had caught him off guard. Yep. I'm busy. Maybe later, Black Nail told her. He had a feeling that he shouldn't commit to anything. It could end badly. He needed to think things over first. Her weird behavior made him more than a little suspicious. She might simply be planning on getting close to him so she could kill him and take his place as leader. Also, she reminded Black Nail of Kita. That was a huge turn-off. With his speech complete, the hobgoblin chieftain then made a break for it. He wanted to get some advice, so he went to find Gob. He was the only hobgoblin Black Nail could trust, and they came from very different backgrounds. Maybe he would have some wisdom to share. What do you think of the new hobgoblins? Black Nail asked when he found Gob over by his longhouse. They will serve you or die, Gob replied seriously. Well, of course, but one of them stands out, don't you think? True, it's weird how he is still fat. Is he going to get even bigger if he eats? Gob replied thoughtfully. No, the female. Black Nail hissed. Why is she the only female to transform? I don't know. I haven't thought much about it, because you haven't ordered me to. Fine, what do you think about her, as a female? Black Nail asked him. This was obviously one of those times he had to be very specific with Gob. She looks a little thin, because she just transformed, but she will probably thicken up and become attractive after a while. Gob replied uncertainly. Do you have any advice for dealing with her? Well, she is a hobgoblin, so try not to get killed. It was obvious that Gob wasn't an expert on female hobgoblins, and that he really wasn't understanding what Black Nail was trying to get at. He had been hoping Gob would have knowledge to share since he had come from a wild tribe that had been ruled by a hobgoblin. With a disappointed sigh, Black Nail headed off towards his cave. Was he just overthinking things? Gob seemed fine with her. Maybe some form of human stupidity had rubbed off on him. Their mating rituals were weird and complex. Females and sex had never bothered Black Nail before. He had mated with quite a few female goblins in his life, but he had mostly lost interest in them over the past year. Was he attracted to the female hobgoblin? He wasn't sure. She was a lot more human-like than a goblin. That was both a turn-on and a turn-off. In particular, memories of his experiences with one human in Dagger Point kept popping into his head, Luphira. Thinking about her always set Black Nail on edge. Actually, it had been after Luphira had ambushed him that he had started to lose interest in female goblins. No, that was just a coincidence. There was no way he found humans attractive, not even the ones with big breasts like Luphira. Was it too late to leave this village and find a new one? La la la, Black Nail hummed loudly to himself as he headed for his cave. He was trying to drown out his own obnoxious thoughts. It was even sort of working. What are you doing? Kita asked from where she was standing outside the cave. That's some of the worst singing I've ever heard. Barking dogs sound better when they're in heat. Her voice made Black Nail stop and look up. Kita wasn't someone he would usually go to for advice, but maybe she might have an idea about naming the female goblin. She was technically a female as well. Shut up and listen, the hobgoblin told her before explaining his problem to her. He left anything even remotely connected to sex, though. He didn't want to confuse her simple brain. Oh, there are female hobgoblins? I can't wait to meet her. Kita replied as she grinned and looked around. There were no female hobgoblins in sight, so she turned back to Black Nail. Of course there are, you idiot, he told her. I was beginning to wonder since all of you were male, but then I thought it might just be because of you. Because of me? Yay, I was thinking maybe hobgoblin women were avoiding you. This statement earned her an annoyed glare from Black Nail. Why would anyone avoid him? Female goblins had thrown themselves at him. He was both strong and incredibly handsome. His nose had a perfect pointy tip. Stick to the name, stupid. What should I call her? He told Kita. I don't know. A lot of women are named after flowers, especially ones from romantic plays, not that I've ever watched anything dumb like a play. I spend all my time fighting and shit. Since he had no idea what she was on about, Black Nail ignored the later part of what Kita had said. It didn't sound important anyway. Flowers, Black Nail mused to himself as he began walking away from Kita. She called after him but he ignored it. He was done talking to her. Cedar had taught Black Nail the names of quite a few flowers, like goat's beard or stinging creeper. Stinging creeper sounded like a good fit for the female hobgoblin. It wouldn't hurt to get more input first, though. Geralt might be worth talking to. With the mutant wolf dead and his pack scattered, Black Nail was probably safe making the journey to shelter by himself. It would take a while for other creatures to move into the wolf's old territory. However, Black Nail didn't feel like walking all the way there. He had just gotten back and his feet sort of hurt. Maybe he would just take a stroll around the camp instead. He still hadn't seen everything that had changed, and it wouldn't be a bad idea to check in on Imp and Ferrer. Who knew what they had gotten up to? They didn't disappoint him. After crossing the camp, Black Nail found Ferrer over by the clay firing pits. The little goblin wasn't alone. Imp was right beside him, and they were both studying a furnace. The sight of the huge oven surprised Black Nail. It was a long structure with an entrance at the front and a chimney at the back that was taller than him. It wasn't made from just clay either. The walls and roof had been reinforced with countless bricks. The roof even looked to have been made from a brick arch. What in the deepest green is this for? Black Nail asked as he walked over. Making bricks, Imp replied. But you already have bricks, and you needed them to make this, Black Nail pointed out. We used a smaller kiln to make the bricks for this so we could make even more bricks, Imp explained. Looking around, Black Nail saw the other kilns. There was the small one Ferrer had created first. It looked like one big lump of clay the size of a goblin. Beside that, there was also another kiln that was about 3 times as large as the first. It was beehive-shaped and it looked like it had been created using crude bricks that had been plastered with clay. 3 tall pots could be seen cooling down inside of it. Why do we need to make so many bricks? Black Nail asked. To burn more interesting things. Ferrer replied cheerfully. So we can build important things, like even bigger kilns, Imp added. Black Nail sighed. Why do you want a bigger kiln? Magic. Imp explained as he raised both his arms dramatically. I need better tools. I need to tame the flames. Crystals must have steady heat to grow. That was probably the best answer Black Nail was going to get. He had no idea what Imp got up to when he was doing his magic stuff. It wasn't like Black Nail couldn't see a few ways to use the bricks himself. He was just surprised Imp and Ferrer had gone to such lengths. They had obviously worked hard on this since Black Nail had left, and that thankfully meant that they had been too busy to get into trouble. Alright, whatever, Black Nail told his minions before turning and starting to walk away. Now that he'd met with all the hobgoblins, Black Nail decided to see what had happened to the body of the fallen wolf. He'd brought it back with him to camp, but he hadn't seen it since. He wanted to keep its hide as trophy and its teeth would also make an interesting necklace. Anyone that saw Black Nail wearing that would instantly know how big of a deal he was. What was left of the mutant's corpse was hanging up on the drying rack. Someone had skinned the beast and hung the hide up to dry. Black Nail walked over to the wolf's pelt and gave it a sniff. He smelled brains. It seemed like it was being prepared correctly, but it wasn't done yet. It would be a few more days until it had dried out. Out of curiosity, Black Nail ran a hand across the grey fur that covered one side of the hide. The hairs prickled his skin and pushed back against him. They were much tougher and springier than normal hair, even if they weren't as hard as when the wolf had used them to defend itself. Still, the hide was probably strong enough to make a useful cloak that would turn a blow or two. Black Nail's thoughts were suddenly interrupted by someone yelling hello, boss. He turned around to see Scamp headed his way. What are you doing here? Black Nail asked. Scamp usually skulked around so that no one could find him and force him to work. Gob ordered me to tan all these hides. I catch most the big beasts, and that's a lot of work, but he still gets mad if I let any of their skins rot, Scamp replied. He sounded annoyed about it. Good for him, Black Nail huffed. It sounded like Gob was doing an excellent job. It isn't fair. Why do I need to do everything? What happened to the rest of the wolf? Black Nail asked. He didn't feel the need to respond to Scamp's sniveling. The meat smelled funny and went bad right away. The bones are in the cold cave there, and Imp took the crystal thing that was in its skull, Scamp answered. What crystal? The mutant's horn, it was a magic stone that went into its head. Imp took it. Hey, Black Nail remarked to himself. He would have to talk to Imp about that later. What about the little piggies? I remember claiming those. No one ate them yet, did they? No one would dare, boss. The piggies are all in a cage. Good. Have you been feeding them? I want them nice and fat. Pig meat is so juicy. I can't wait. They've been getting food scraps, Scamp answered. There were things that goblins wouldn't eat. Black Nail couldn't picture that. Who exactly has been looking after them? Kiddo was doing it but she stopped. The piggies don't mind goblins, but every time she tried to pet them they squealed and bit at her. They really don't like her much. I'm keeping them, forever, Black Nail exclaimed gleefully. He had finally found the means to keep the annoying redhead away. All he had to do was train the pigs to follow him around and then they would chase her away every time she bothered him. Boss. Are you going to talk to Gob about getting someone else to tan the hides? Scamp asked tentatively. Sure, no problem, Black Nail replied. Really? Yay, all you have to do is find another hobgoblin and get them to take your place. Feel free to beat them up until they agree. Oh, Scamp exclaimed disappointment. He didn't sound too optimistic about his chances. Black Nail wasn't either. Now get back to work, Black Nail told him before starting to walk away. All the distractions had been nice, but now it was time for him to train the new hobgoblins. That meant he had to decide on a name for the female hobgoblin. He couldn't put it off anymore. Screw all this thinking. It was annoying. He was just going to go with the first thing on his mind. There was no point getting worked up over the name of a hobgoblin just because she was female. After crossing the camp, Black Nail met up with the new hobgoblins at the training ground. They were waiting for him with training blades in their hands. Black Nail appraised them and gave the female a particularly long look before approaching them. Their features and attitude hadn't changed, but the female was now wearing one of Kita's shirts. The redhead must have tracked her down and given it to her. That or she had stolen it. No, that couldn't have happened. She wouldn't have dared steal anything from Black Nail's cave. Black Nail stopped in front of the female goblin and studied her for a second before speaking up. Your name is Hera. She had already been smiling as she stared at Black Nail, but the grin on the female hobgoblin's face widened considerably as she listened. What does it mean? She asked eagerly. Black Nail snorted. Names didn't have to mean anything. He made most them up on the spot, and most the humans had nonsense for names. Although in this case he had chosen hers for a reason. It's based on the name of someone I used to know. She was angry all the time and killed lots of people before she died. Wow. I love it so much, the hobgoblin exclaimed breathlessly. Her eyes were practically shining with joy. Black Nail was sure that Herad would have approved of her name inspiring that of a hobgoblin. The bandit chieftain had always been very hobgoblin-like herself, ruthless, cunning, and quick. Black Nail was unsure about her opinion on cheese, though. Now listen you rats. If you think Gob was hard on you then you were wrong. I'm going to really train you, Black Nail announced as he stepped back and addressed all the hobgoblins. A grin appeared on Black Nail's lips as he picked up a training blade and held it up. He would probably feel better about Hera after he had beaten her up a few times. That was how he'd grown to accept the presence of all the other hobgoblins. Interlude, no favorites among men. The clatter of dice filled the room as the small cubes hit the wooden table and rolled across it. It was a quiet noise, but the previously rowdy tavern had suddenly gone silent a moment before. A dozen eyes watched with complete focus as the two dice finally came to stop. It's Demon's eyes. You rolled a 2, and that means you lose, a rough-looking man observed in carefully neutral tone. That was the signal for everyone else in the tavern to let their breath out and start moving again. The room suddenly filled up with background noise. The watchers sat back and began talking to themselves as the barmaid wandered away with a tray full of dirty dishes. Shit, I was so close. Everything was falling into place, Elias swore in disappointment. I just needed another good roll to finish off the straight set. The young man was standing at one end up the table and he punched its wooden surface in anger. The impact shook the table only slightly. It hadn't been a strong blow. Well, that's definitely the end of your little lucky streak. You just lost everything you had won and then some, a portly man in the fine clothes of a merchant told him. You win some and you lose some. The gods have no favorites among men. The fates they weave suit them, not the likes of us, another man laughed. He's sitting on a chair and leaning back with his boots resting on the table, and he grinned cheekily when Elias threw him a sour look. Bah, I will get a lucky break eventually. My bad fortune can't last forever, Elias muttered to himself. His remark just caused the man that looked like a merchant to chuckle. He then scooped up the pile of coins Elias had placed on the counter earlier. It wasn't a small heap. Several of the coins glinted with the sheen of gold. Elias had just lost a fair bit of money. I wish you nothing but good luck with that, unless of course you decide to come back here and bet with me again, and then I'll gladly take more of your coin, the merchant replied happily. I think I'll find another den to place my wagers at. I don't think place is good luck for me, Elias said as he stepped away from the table. Suit yourself, lad. Personally, I don't think you are going to be finding luck like that anywhere, the seated man told him. Elias just frowned to himself and headed for the door. He didn't see the point in staying here, since he had no more coins on hand. He'd spent them on drinks and lost them gambling. I was so bloody damn close this time, he muttered to himself as he pushed the tavern door open and stepped outside. Outside, the cloudy sky overhead was growing dark. It was late in the afternoon and well after supper. Elias looked up at the sky as he walked back to the inn he was staying at. The clouds were grey and heavy looking. There was a good chance it would rain. After eating supper Elias had gone out to find a new gambling spot. That was what he had done every night since arriving in town. After parting with Black Nail, he had headed east until he'd found a fair-sized town. The walled settlements that were left in the north were hardly thriving, but it was easy enough to find a place to sleep as well as a good place to play some games of chance. Having a lot of gold helped. Elias had quickly sold one of the larger chunks of gold that Black Nail had given him. That had given him more than enough to spend several days in luxury. The best wine and women in town had been his. Tonight he didn't feel like celebrating much, though. He just wanted to get to bed early. Tomorrow was a new day, which would wipe his slate clean. It probably wasn't a great idea to keep spending so much money in one place. It would attract attention. However, Elias wasn't ready to leave town just yet. Traveling was a pain, and wanted to win some money back here first. He couldn't leave without getting one good lucky break at dice or cards. That would leave a bad taste in his mouth. Leaving on a high note was important. There wasn't very many people in sight as Elias made his to the inn. Those people he did pass kept walking without doing more than glancing in his direction. It was getting late, so people wanted off the streets. Elias passed a single guardsman with a truncheon who was leaning up against a wall, but the uniformed man barely glanced his way. He didn't seem to be paying much attention to his surroundings. The guards in towns like these were usually lazy and corrupt. A minute later, the guardsman was behind Elias and out of sight, and the entrance to the inn he was staying at lay before him. As he walked, a group of 3 men exited an alley and headed his way. The men were dressed as common laborers and weren't suspicious in any real way, but Elias was suddenly nervous. Ever since he had escaped that crazy hobgoblin that had entrapped him, he should have been feeling ecstatic. He was finally free and he had more money than ever before. However, a lingering sense of dread had remained within him. Instead of fading, it had grown steadily stronger over time. Elias had tried taking a hot bath and scrubbing himself clean, but that hadn't helped. Getting completely smashed on hard liquor had also proven to be but a temporary reprieve, with foul consequences of its own. Under no circumstances was Elias planning to do the things Black Kale had told him to. He was quite happy to spend the gold he had in peace. Getting in touch with Warwick's men or any other bandits sounded dangerous and stupid. No, he would just head east away from the cursed hobgoblin. If Black Nail ever did manage to track him down, unlikely, then Elias was sure he could come up with a good excuse, like that the gold had been stolen before he could show anyone. Oh, pardon me, one of the 3 passing laborers said as he looked up and gave Elias a friendly grin. No problem, thank you, Elias replied as the group of 3 men stepped to the side and walked past him. A sigh of relief escaped Elias' lips. It had really been foolish of him to worry about some random people on the street. Once he was safely at the inn, he would order a nice cup of wine and hit the sack. That was when someone grabbed the back of Elias' shirt and pulled him backward. Elias yelped, went stiff with surprise, and then froze in terror as he felt something thin and cold press itself against his neck. It was Knife. Actually, I just remembered that we have some business with you, someone said as Ilya was pulled off the street and into another alley. Once there, he was spun around and confronted by the 3 laborers. They grinned maliciously at him. What do you want? Elias gasped. You've been flashing a lot of coin around lately, newcomer, one of the men replied. You can have it. Elias hurriedly told his assailants. I don't have much on me, but I have some more in my room at the inn. Oh, we know. We've already gone and taken a look around that room of yours, one of the men chuckled as he held up a familiar-looking sack. Elias's hopes fell. That was the bag where kept all the raw gold he had been given. He had nothing else of value. Then what do you want from me? It's not often you quality find rocks like this around here, and you don't seem like a miner to me. We want to know where you got it. Information like that could be very lucrative. Several different responses flashed through Elias' mind. He quickly chose the one that gave his assailants the least reason to kill him and leave his body in the alley to rot. I found it in a cave. There's lots more gold there, and I can take you to it. Hey, that is indeed promising. Personally, that doesn't sound like something I'd be interested in going out to find. I'm a city man, myself, but I'm sure we can find someone who would be interested. Yay, Dariel's band is in town. This sounds like something they could profit from. They've done a fair bit of raiding for Warwick. Elias chalked down a sob. It seemed like he was heading back to shelter after all. Why was his luck always so terrible?